Hello and welcome. This is the first of a series of Boise School Board candidate forums that we're sponsoring here with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. I'm Kevin Richert. I'm a reporter with Idaho EdNews, and we're pleased to be a partner on this series of virtual forums. You'll be hearing from the four candidates in race number one. The way this works is the four candidates are going to be running on the same ballot on September 6th. The top two vote getters will be elected to 6-year terms. You'll be hearing from all four candidates here in the next hour. We have Krista Hazler and Beth Oppenheimer and Greg Woodard. Dave Wagers had a time conflict and will be catching up with us about 15 minutes in, so you will see him shortly. I'm going to begin by allowing each of the candidates to kind of briefly give us an introduction, tell us a little bit about themselves and how their life experience informs their candidacy for school board. And Krista, why don't I start with you? We'll go in alphabetical order and we'll go from there and start jumping into questions after that.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm Krista Hassler, and I am a mom of 4 Boise School District students. So I think that in and of itself is a fairly big life experience that I've got. I've got 4 students who are in the district right now. I'm very invested in our school district and the direction it's going. I also have a background. I've got a master's degree in social work, and I worked as a therapist with teenagers who were in residential treatment. So kids that have kind of hit their bottom, they couldn't live at home anymore. And they came and lived in our program, and there was a school there, and I worked with them through the school to build back up. So I feel like that's also incredibly relevant, especially with everything happening in our schools right now. And I also worked with kids that were in foster care. I worked with kids in inner city Chicago. So I've worked with kids in various circumstances, and I work currently with teenagers just in a volunteer position who are fairly high functioning, doing well. So I think that I would represent the students in our schools and recognize that there's various needs and we need to meet the needs of our students. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Krista. Beth?
Hi, thank you. And thank you to the Boise Metro Chamber and Idaho EdNews for hosting this forum. My name is Beth Oppenheimer, and I have spent my career working in some aspect of education, whether it was at Boise State in higher ed, whether it was in DC and working in junior achievement with K through 12 students. And I currently, for the past 11 years, have been working in the field of early childhood education. I believe that I have a very unique lens of not only supporting our students, but also supporting teachers in our community and making sure that our schools are strong. Being a trustee for the past 6 years, I have learned a lot. I know that it's a very complex system. And, there have been times that I thought, well, why don't we just do this? And understanding the complexities that come along with running a school district and also being in the role as a trustee helped me really bring a valuable lens to this position. And I'm really looking forward to the next 6 years. Over the past 6 years, we've had some good times and we've had some really challenging times. And it has stretched the way that we process things and the way that we approach things. And so I'm just looking forward to the next 6 years. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to give a general background of my family and experience because it's literally why I'm sitting here in front of you today. Just generally speaking, I've been working with youth, specifically junior high and high school, for about 20 years in various churches that I've attended as a youth leader and a volunteer. So I feel like I've got a good handle on that particular area. But more importantly, like Krista, I'm a dad. I've got 5 kids who have been or are in the Boise School District at some point during their education. And, my background, my family, it's a little unique. I've got my 2 oldest boys. They're my biological boys. I've just had my oldest graduate from Bora High School. He's moving on to college, so that's exciting for us. My next two, my son and daughter, they are a sibling set, and we adopted them about coming up on 10 years ago now. And then my youngest, who is not so young anymore, she's 12. We fostered her from the time she was an infant until about 3 years old. She went back to her biological father, but we've been blessed to have her still in our lives quite a bit. And we actually had her up here last year for a time, and she was enrolled in the Boise School District. And so I give that background because of my family structure. Some of my kids have some very unique needs. And my son, for example, my adopted son, he, because of the trauma in his past, he really thrives and needs structure and routine. And when he was going to West, that was provided to him, and he knew when his classes were, he knew when his sports were, and what the bus schedule was. And then COVID came along and pretty much blew all that up, and completely understand that. And the difficulty I had was that I felt like the district, they just were not listening to a lot of parents who were, myself included, who were saying, look, we need to get back to in-person schooling as soon as we can, because it really had an impact on my family in a negative way and on my son. And I felt like a lot of my pleas and pleas of other parents were falling on deaf ears. And so that kind of started my motivation here to run. And it's pretty much why I'm sitting here in front of you today. Thank you.
Thank you all. So let's jump into some questions. And what we'll do here over the next hour is we'll rotate around. So no one of you will have to answer first or get to answer last. So let's jump into some questions. Krista, I'm going to start with you. And I apologize for butchering your last name. I have one that gets mispronounced a lot, so I'm sensitive to that. But let's jump into questions. I'll start with you, Krista. What do you consider the top priority for the Boise School District, and how would you address it?
Well, I think there's a number of top priorities for the Boise School District. One of my top priorities will be addressing the tone of the learning environment in our education system. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, but for me, it's a major issue. And I think it's because of my background as a social worker that I see what's going on with our students in schools. And I think there's really key things missing for them in the learning environment. Number one, I see that there's a lack of respect. All of our schools tout respect as one of our values, but students aren't really honoring that value in the classroom. And I feel like that needs to be addressed immediately within our schools. And not just for our students, but also for our educators. That's a really difficult environment to have to go into and teach in. And so I really want to focus on addressing that within our schools. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing a lack of respect in classrooms is we've taken authority from teachers in classrooms. So that's something that makes it really difficult to manage consistently a classroom with rules and expectations when we can't have there's no authority to say, no, that's not okay here, and stand up. So for me, that will be a major priority that I will work to address within our schools. I know that there's other additional priorities for me in regards to education and improving and building our education system. But for me, my top priority will be working within the learning environment and fixing the social structure that exists currently in our learning environments.
Okay, thank you. Beth.
Hi, thank you for that question. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is being able to continue to offer all of our students opportunities to engage in their learning, whatever that looks like for them. And what I mean by that is that in the Boise School District, we offer a vast array of opportunities for students who have different learning abilities, whether that is a Montessori program or a GATE program or the Treasure Valley Math and Science or our dentist technical education. Students learn differently, and being able to continue to offer students that the options of how they learn best and supporting each individual student's learning abilities is going to continue to be a big challenge, and I look forward to continuing with the great work that we're doing.
Greg, sorry.
Thank you, Kevin. My top priority is kind of a dual set. And first and foremost is parent choice. And that kind of flows into board transparency. And for me, and I think for most parents in this district, we feel that we are the ones that are primarily responsible for our children's education. And I know that we need to work in conjunction with the schools and particularly the teachers. And I've had wonderful interactions, and my wife has, with my kids' teachers. So that's critical. But I feel like that over the last several years in particular, that a lot of our voices as parents have not been heard or heeded by the district. And there's been a frustration level there. And that kind of dovetails into board transparency. There have been several decisions that the board has made over the past couple of years, very critical policies that have been implemented or decisions made with zero or little parent input at all. And I feel like as a board that putting the parents as a priority and first in line and listening to them, informing them of decisions that are coming up and taking their feedback, to me is critical for the education of our kids, as well as to let us know that our voices are being heard. I recognize that myself and other parents are not going to always see eye to eye with the board, and I understand that and I respect that. However, when your voice isn't heard as a parent, you feel like that you're being shut out of the system completely, and so that's going to be my top priority. Thank you.
A lot of what you can do as a trustee is dependent on what happens at the legislature and decisions that are made at the state level. So I want to ask all three of you, where do you feel like the legislature has supported education? Where do you feel that the legislature has come up short? And on this one, we'll start with Beth, go to Greg, and then Kristen.
Sure. So as someone who has dealt with the legislature quite a bit over the last 11 years, I certainly understand the complexities within the legislature and the decisions that they make. I do feel like it's hard to find a candidate within the legislature that doesn't say that they're pro-education. And everybody has different thoughts and opinions about what that looks like. I think that some of the decisions that the legislature has made over the past several years is, I do believe that the legislature is trying very hard to continue to invest in public education. They've done that through investments in career ladder. The governor has done that in quite a bit of investment in early literacy. And so paying attention to that and really engaging in what's happening there. Sometimes the legislature makes decisions, it kind of ties our hands a little bit, but at the same time, I do believe that they do want what's best for education. That is another body, as we all know, that they do not see eye to eye on certain initiatives and whatnot. But I think it is important for trustees to be at the table, to talk to legislators, not just here in Boise, but across the state, and make sure that we are having our voices heard. We're very fortunate to have the Idaho School Boards Association that helps us be a voice at the legislature. And we are able to, at that grassroots level, be able to share what's happening within our districts with ISBA so that they can help us carry the voice. Our school board is very involved with ISBA, and it's that partnership with all of the education advocates and lobbying groups that is going to help get that word out. So I do think the legislature, sometimes there's good decisions, sometimes there's not, but at the end of the day, it's having those conversations and be able to come together to do what's best for our students and our teachers and our community.
Great.
Thank you, Kevin. And I guess, not being an incumbent, I have the outside view of what's going on. And I appreciate Beth, and we'll hear from Dave on the inside, and maybe I'll get a chance to experience that one day. But I know that, Boise School District is an independent district, has an independent charter, which gives it some, I think, flexibility and some benefits, although admittedly, I'm still unraveling those. It's a very old charter, and there's an interesting interplay between the district and the legislature. I do know that, like Beth said, there's everybody in the State House seems to be saying, they support education. And I do know that there has been a significant increase in the budget from the state this year. So that gives the board and all the districts flexibility. I'm not exactly sure how that money's earmarked, but I would hope that each individual district can determine in large part where that goes. But I think definitely extra money for teachers and their compensation and benefits to help us compete with other districts in other states, and hopefully more money for facilities to make sure that we provide those for the students or areas where I see as a parent just looking from the outside in and seeing, daily reports and news stories and things like that, I think that the financial support from the legislature is key here.
Krista.
All right, thank you. So something that I'm sitting here thinking as we're talking through is I also have this outside view of it, but something I think that I bring as a strength to the table that I would offer with the legislature is I am an advocate. I am very good at saying this is what we need to do and helping people see why. So I would definitely use that skill and that strength in working with the legislature. Something that I also think is happening right now with the legislature is I've appreciated that they're saying, Common Core is not working in our state, and that they're trying to address how we need to move forward with education to make it more successful. So in agreeing with Beth and Greg that yes, they support education, it is a top priority in our state, and we recognize there's things we need to do better in our state to educate our students, prepare them for college. I think something else that we need to look at is, politics. There's too much of a play of politics in our schools. And I am finding so much more of that just running for this election that, it doesn't need to be a one side or another side. It needs to be a side of we're on the side of kids and helping them see that. And I think ultimately that's what we want. I don't think that you would find a legislator that would say, no, actually, I don't think kids and education really matter. So I think that it just comes down to helping people see that we need to make decisions that are in the best interest of kids. And it's a collective effort. It's not just one, it's not just the board, it's not just the legislature, it's working together to make that happen.
Okay. Thank you. And notice that Dave Weegers has joined us now. And thank you for getting in here and catching up with us. I'm going to clean up two things with you, Dave. I'm going to let you do kind of the same introduction that the other three candidates did at the outset. Tell us very quickly a little bit about yourself and how your life experience informs your candidacy.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. First of all, I apologize for not being on time. I had a previously arranged presentation, so buzzed out of that and onto this, which thank you for having this forum. My name is Dave Weegers. I'm currently president of the Boise School Board. I've served on the school board for the past 7.5 years. But more importantly, I guess I'm a former parent. Well, I'm always a parent, actually. But I've been on the school board for 7.5 years. Like I said, I'm president of Idaho Candy Company. I'm a Boise native. I graduated from Boise School, so I came up through Cole Elementary, Fairmont Junior High, Capitol High School. My wife went through Boise schools as well and ended up graduating from Bora High. Her dad was in the first graduating class of Bora High. I have 4 children, 3 graduated from Boise High, and one importantly actually graduated from Frank Church High School. So I've had a different kind of view of how the school district does its work. I also grew up in it with my mom being a teacher at Fairmont Junior High for 15 years. So I've got I guess I'm all in on the Boise School District is what it comes into. And I'm all in on kids. And I, like Krista said, I guess, it really is about kids and how do we make sure that we prepare them in a way that they're working towards the future that they want. So that's really my background. I have a finance and accounting background. I worry about the details. I worry about the process. I read the budgets. I spend the time on those things. And I also put the time in that it takes to be a trustee. And lately that's been, for me, it can be from 10 hours a week to more, depending on the week. I know during COVID, we had 40 meetings in 1 year. And that's a lot of public meetings. But it's, once again, it's important work and we're doing it for the kids.
And Dave, let's stick with you for a minute. The question that I'd asked the other 3 candidates, I'll restate it. I asked all of you to talk about the legislature and the relationship between the legislature and what you can do at the Boise School Board level. Where do you feel that the legislature has supported education, and where do you feel like the legislature has come up short?
Well, it's good to see more funding enter the picture for education. I mean, we've obviously been a little bit behind the 8 ball on that piece. Curriculum has been kind of a back and forth with the legislature a little bit. But what I guess what I didn't know about being a trustee when I first started is, especially as Boise School District trustees and as the Boise School District, we have a certain, I think, position within the educational structure. And it's not always a loved position, but it is an influential position. And that's where I love the use that we do of the Idaho School Board Association. And I've become very involved in that over the past 7.5 years. I wasn't quite sure at the beginning, okay, why do we mess with this? We're really a large district, and does this really fit our needs? But it does fit our needs, and it fits it from a statewide perspective. Because if we can connect with other school districts of varying sizes, with different legislators, with different needs, but also have them realize, hey, we really are interested in what's best for all kids in Idaho, then we can reach out to them. They can work with their legislatures, which normally wouldn't talk to a Boise School District trustee. And that gives us a chance to have influence in the State House in different ways by using that body and those relationships. But it is about key relationships. If you don't do the work and you show up to the meetings and do those things, you don't develop those relationships. So it's much more wide-ranging than attending Boise School District meetings. It's going to other meetings, meeting other trustees, providing resolutions forward. We move forward from the Boise School District, more resolutions through the ISBA to the legislature than probably any other school district in the state. And we work very hard at making sure those are fair to all school districts. We ask that question as we're going through this. Does this work? If it doesn't work and we still need to move it forward for our district, we will do that. But typically we try and get partners, we get co-sponsors, and then we can actually make a little bit of dent within the legislature, moving the things forward that we need to move forward to help public education be its very best.
Thank you. So for the next question here, I'm going to start with Greg, and then we'll go Greg, Krista, Dave, Beth. And Greg, this is something you alluded to in your open. You talked a little bit about the district's response to the pandemic. And what I want to do with this question is maybe move the question forward. If science suggests that we're in the middle of another surge, if the local scientific experts and the national scientific experts suggest that there's a need to step up pandemic protections protocols in the schools, how would you approach that?
Thank you, Kevin. And that's a great question, great point. So when the pandemic first started, I understand, as I think all of us do, that was a once in a generation type of an event, and I don't envy Beth or Dave or the other trustees for having to deal with that. And I've said in the past, and I will continue to say, I think that the board handled the beginning of the pandemic well. When we went to online and all virtual learning for a time, I think the district and the board did a great job of getting out materials, the electronic devices, and getting information out and getting organized rather quickly. I think, though, as time has gone on and we've with the development of the vaccine, we've had a lot of studies come out on impact of masks. I think if that comes about again, I think we're in a much better position. And you mentioned, Kevin, the scientists, and obviously my first thing would be to listen to all sides of the science debate, because there's always going to be people on each side, and I understand that. But given the advances we've made already and the readily available vaccines, I think that all that needs to be taken into account for the next step, should we have numbers increase to the impact that they were in the past. So personally, as I said, I'm an advocate for parent choice. So when it comes to things like masks and things, I think that should be left to an individual decision by the parents. I think we have plenty of options between the vaccines, between online learning that should give all parents a right to choose that. But again, not being on the inside of that, I know that the board had multiple meetings with CDH and others, for example. I just would encourage whoever's on the board, if this happens again, that they look at all sides and consult all experts and physicians and doctors in making their decisions. And I would encourage them to recognize that that they should also put the parent choice first on that and see if they can accommodate as many as possible there.
Krista.
I think we've had such a shift from where we started, and I agree. I think, you guys were put into an impossible situation, really, and I feel like that is really important to recognize. So where I think we stand now, we have a lot more information, and I think that we've also seen a major shift in what the virus is doing. Our death rates are not where they were. And if we also just compare it to right next door. So I moved mid-pandemic. We moved here into we were in our home, but we moved our kids over mid-pandemic into Boise school districts for social purposes, that we felt like our kids needed to be over on this side and out of their schools at West Ada. And through that process, I mean, my friends were going to school across the road and they were like, oh man, sucker, like you totally lost out. Your kids don't get to go to school, all this different stuff, because they were comparing right next door of a completely different situation, a completely different handling of the pandemic. And for me, I had to look at, we were doing what we felt like was the right thing to do for our kids. And so we were able to stay the course on that. But now I think we have information that's different than we had originally. We see West Ada did handle it differently than Boise did. And was there statistical significance in their handling of it versus ours? No, not really. When we look at the actual data of it, there weren't like a lot higher numbers over in their side of town versus our side. I mean, I just think we have to look at this going forward with, what information do we have now? How are we going to go forward differently? I think having kids on screens for 6 to 8 hours a day has played out in a huge way for their mental health. I mean, we're seeing significant increase in depression and anxiety. We had, you look at what the American Academy of Pediatrics is telling us. They say kids on screens 2 hours or less a day. There was science backing that. And I feel like we kind of ignored that fact. We ignored what was going on with kids because we were so hyper-focused on what health professionals were saying. Health professionals in regards to COVID, not health professionals in regards to mental health and what was going on with kids. So I think, again, we have to just move forward. We can't change what happened in the past, and we have to look at where we're at right now. But I think the fallout from COVID is significant, and we can't just say, well, everyone's going to mask up again and we're going to keep kids out of school again, because COVID numbers will probably go up. But that doesn't mean that COVID death rates are going up. It's going to be spread. We might be in red again because it's going to be significant in our community. But the virus and how we are reacting to it now has shifted. And so I think we just have to move forward and have a change in perspective now that we're going forward.
Okay. Dave.
So I used to have not gray hair, and now I have gray hair. That's what COVID did to me. It was an impossible situation, but we tackled it and we worked hard at it. We tried to create policies, processes, and procedures, and that's really what the school district is all about. As a matter of fact, last night in the school board meeting, we reviewed our health and safety plan and passed our health and safety plan, which is very similar to the one that we had last spring. But it is a continuous improvement process. I mean, like both Krista and Greg said, the world has changed and the virus has changed itself. And we need to pay attention to those changes, and we need to look at those things. But we also, we need to look at experts within our communities who we prefer to use. So we talk to the head doctors at St. Al's and St. Luke's on a regular basis. We consult with Central District Health on a regular basis. And those help provide information. Those are our health professionals that we rely on. And since they're viewed as our community experts, I think those are probably our best folks to rely on. We didn't know that we were going to need to become community health experts as trustees. And we're not, frankly, and I don't know that that's our role, but we need to take advice and input from those folks, synthesize that, and then come up with the best answers. But when our hospitals are filling up or full, and then there needs to be some action taken occasionally. I hope we never get there again. It looks like now we won't. But this is part of the role of being a trustee. The answers aren't always easy, and we had to push and prod, but now I think, since we've been through it before, we have a chance to set up this continuous improvement process where we can look at what we've done, move forward to the future, make sure we still involve all stakeholders, which includes students, parents, teachers, staff, administration, and regular and outside patrons of the community as well, because we affect all different kinds of families with our school district. So it's an ongoing process. We've learned some how to handle it. We'll probably never fully learn how to handle it, but we'll continue to get better.
And Beth.
Thank you. Again, this has been a very complex situation that we've been in. And Kevin, if I understand your question, it wasn't necessarily directed at COVID specifically, but a pandemic in general. And,
we can broaden it out to the public health situation.
we don't know what we don't know. Just like as COVID came along, there was no playbook. We had no idea. I think that there was a reason that our governor, he allowed he didn't make a statewide decision on how to navigate COVID. He let the individual school districts make that decision. And he did that because every community is unique and every community has varying needs and aspects. If you look at some of our smaller rural districts, it didn't make sense for them to close down schools because they didn't have high spread of COVID in that school. So they were in a different situation than the Boise School District was. That being said, we have learned a lot. I agree with Dave in that it has allowed us to reflect on how we respond to something like this, how we move forward, and putting together the health and safety plan, which we had several conversations about what this looks like. And, and I think that we've learned a lot in terms of feedback from parents and students and educators and whatnot. We're never going to make everyone happy. When we were going through this and we did all the parent surveys, there was a point where it was literally split in half. What do we do from parents and other stakeholders? And we had to make a decision, and we had to look at the experts. I think moving forward, if we were to experience, God forbid, another pandemic, whatever that looks like, I think that we have a fairly good playbook now from lessons learned and how we move forward, continue to rely on the experts, continue to listen to a variety of different stakeholders. And at the end of the day, we have to make a decision. I think a few things that have come out of the last couple of years, Krista, you mentioned the online learning. That doesn't work for every student. But I've also heard from a lot of parents, and which is why we've kept the online opportunity, is because some students are thriving with that. And so again, it's offering choice to students and their individual learning abilities to be able to navigate how they learn best and what works best for their family. So there have been some good things that have come out of this. Was it perfect? No. But I think that at the end of the day, we've come out of it, and we'll continue to learn and we'll continue to grow and do what's best at the end of the day for our students and our families.
Okay. So for this next question, I'm going to start with Dave, and we'll go Dave, Beth, Greg, Krista on this one. Dave, you alluded to this in your questionnaire, the all-day kindergarten decision that the board made earlier this year. You decided to adopt all-day kindergarten. It's going to lead to fairly limited half-day kindergarten options for parents who want that, but you're going to all-day kindergarten. Talk about why you went that route and how you would measure success going forward. So for Dave and Beth, I want you to talk about the decision and how you measure success. And for Krista and Greg, talk about whether you support the decision and how you would view the all-day kindergarten process if you're elected.
Thanks, Kevin. All-day kindergarten, I am thrilled that we've been able to institute that. Actually, I remember, so I was appointed to the board 7.5 years ago. That was one of the first conversations I remember having on the board is, okay, why aren't we doing all-day kindergarten? Why aren't we doing more pre-K, or at least making those offerings available to families? Because the research shows that's how we can impact kids, especially on an early level. This actually is part of my presentation this morning a little bit, is, what I love about all-day kindergarten is the biggest impact it has, I think in some ways, is for the first grade teachers. The kids show up already knowing how to do school. They are ready to go. They understand, okay, here's how you do a line. Here's how you wash your hands. Here's how you go to recess. I know my colors. I know my letters. I know my shapes. And then we can go to work on that. Instead of where our first grade teachers, they have half a class that's been to kindergarten and half a class that hasn't been to kindergarten. And they spend a ton of time working with those children, trying to get them up to speed with the rest of the class, which is a difficult thing for a teacher to do, but that's their job and they're skilled at it and they make it happen. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity where, and mind you, kindergarten is not mandatory in Idaho. So there will still be some students that don't start at that same level, and that's fine. And we will still reach them where we are because that's what public education does. But I'm looking forward to that opportunity where, and we may not see this for maybe 2-3 years out. I would guess it's going to take that long for it to filter through our system. But as we get to that 3rd grade, where we want every child to read by 3rd grade, I think we're going to see some very good increased numbers on those. So we're going to see that by testing somewhat, and I hope to see those numbers grow. That is the goal, and that's what people pay a lot of attention to. But we're going to see it just by classrooms. We have our schools are very varied in the Boise School District. We have some that are very high, maybe 80% free and reduced lunch, and we have some that are very little. And so you see a great difference. And some of those that are very little, I don't think you're going to see that great an increase because either the kids are in half-day kindergarten already, or their parents were paying for kindergarten for their kids to go there full time. And what I love about this is it's evening the playing field for the families who weren't able to afford kindergarten. It gives them the same opportunities than like a family of mine, where we put that as a priority for our children. We sent them to kindergarten. I mean, they were going to go, and they knew that. They went to preschool. They were going to go. We felt that as parents, it was important to us. But once again, that's a parental choice option. It's good that we have those choices, but we want to make sure that those families that have that chance to have kindergarten in place. Kevin, as far as measuring it, how we know we're going to be successful, it's going to be a time will tell thing. I mean, we'll see that some through scores. We'll see that some in classroom management places where I think it will happen. It will be a better outcome for teachers as well. They will have a better impact on children. So I'm not sure I got all those points, but I got close.
Beth.
Sure. Well, this is certainly an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and I've been advocating for full-day kindergarten across the state for several years. To me, this is about opportunity, and it's about choice. And for years with the Boise School District, we did not have an equitable system, and it was essentially those that could afford it could participate. Those that couldn't didn't have that opportunity. And so this was an opportunity to provide this equitable access, both in terms of offering full-day kindergarten in our schools, and then also making sure that it's free for every single student. When we made this decision, and I know that there's a lot of conversations around how that decision was made. We've been talking about this for a long time, and we have been hearing from every single year that we start school, we hear from several parents who say, how come full-day kindergarten is not offered in my school? I really want it. I have to work. I can't, I want this opportunity, whether families have to work or they just want that opportunity for their kids. And so while we didn't do a survey per se right before that decision was made, we have been hearing from parents for years around wanting to have that full day option for their families. Once that decision was made, we were able to do this before the governor's literacy budget even put funding in for school districts to be able to do this. We did hear from some parents that still wanted that half-day option. And what we did was we had various listening sessions across the district. We offered parents the opportunity to respond if they wanted half-day kindergarten. At the end of the day, we heard from less than 20 parents that wanted a half-day option only, and we made that opportunity. We're going to offer half-day kindergarten at Liberty. In terms of the complexity of a system, it was not feasible. It was not in our budget to offer half-day kindergarten facility space in and of itself, to offer half-day kindergarten in every single school along with full day. You physically cannot do that, and we didn't have the budget to be able to do that. But by offering half-day kindergarten in response to parents' wishes around having half-day kindergarten, we now have, in my opinion, the best of both worlds. We have those full-day opportunities for families who want it, but we also have a half-day opportunity. And I will also say that Kindergarten, while it's not childcare, we have working families who have to have childcare for their children some way, somehow. And when a parent has, and this happened in my family too, when a parent has to work or go to school, having that full day kindergarten option really does support working families because that child is somewhere in childcare anyway. And so to us, it really made sense based on the research and the data to have a full day option so that we're providing equitable access to all families who want and need it.
So for Greg and Krista, just to reset the question, just to recap, did you support the decision to go to all-day kindergarten? And if you're elected, how would you assess the program and measure whether it's successful? Greg and then Krista.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. And this is a great question that kind of reflects why I'm sitting here in front of you today. I agree with Krista that it's really not an us versus them as far as the incumbents go. Admittedly, I wouldn't be here putting my time and my money into this campaign if I didn't have some disagreements with them, with the current incumbents, all of them. But I do support the board's decision to go to full day kindergarten because, again, parent choice is one of my top priorities. But there's often a but with me in involved decision. I will respectfully disagree with Beth. The communication prior to the decision making was not there. I have a parent, close friend, and she's heavily invested in the district and in information on it. And there was little to no communication before the decision was made to go to full day kindergarten. And she happens to have her family where half day is a decision or half day kindergarten is something she wanted. And so, I like to see a contrast. Krista contrasted West Ada with us. My wife teaches in West Ada. The board there, when they have their meetings, they have, I guess you could say their discussions happen at the meetings, and there's often a lot of back and forth and some disagreement. And we don't see that in the Boise School District. And I know that why that is. It's because the Boise trustees have these workshops prior to the general meetings. And that's where I understand a lot of debate happens. Unfortunately, they're during the week, in the middle of the day, so it's difficult for some parents to attend. But they brought this up at one of the workshops about full day kindergarten, and this parent contacted the board and was curious about what was going to happen, and this was not intentional. I don't think it was misinformation, but they were told that the workshop was just to have some discussions based upon pending legislative decisions that year. And then 6 weeks later, the board voted for full day kindergarten and effectively eliminated half day kindergarten on no notice. And so for me, that's the importance of the transparency with the board, to make these decisions or to involve the parents at an early stage in these decisions so that they can get. And I appreciate from Beth, she said that they heard from parents who wanted full day kindergarten, and that's great. And I'm glad we have that option. But there was a significant, number of parents that had their option taken out from under them. Now, with that said, I look forward to, I know our numbers in kindergarten are not ideal, and I think they're still good, but they can be better. And so I look forward to seeing the impact that full day has on this. And I think it is going to be a positive. So I do support that in the end.
Krista.
I have a child going to full day kindergarten, so it feels like a very personal thing to me, right? I will go into say, number one, I think full day kindergarten is a good thing for our district. I will start by saying I see that as a good thing to push forward with. However, the way it was pushed forward is what I take issue with. I have talked to educators who had no idea what was going on. I feel like when you're going to roll something like that out that's that big, having some collaboration ahead of time is effective. Having teachers and staff feel like they've had a say in what's going on and that they know a little bit about what's going on. Our school had no idea how it was going to work until the very end of the spring term. I have a friend who does not want her child going full day for social purposes. That was not something she would have ever chosen to do. And it's been a real struggle for her. Now, why 20 parents came is because 20 parents came because they said, we'll drive our kids to and from a kindergarten half-day program that's not close to my home. so there wasn't that input ahead of time. And I think where there was this transition time, West Ada across the road has sent surveys out and asked parents, what works for you? What would you choose? Again, it's how it was done. It's not what was chosen, it was how it was chosen. And I think that's another, just kind of leads into a bigger issue. As I've been talking to different people in the community and educators, something that people are feeling that's very real is decisions are already made before it's even proposed to the public. So even when these surveys are coming out, it's not to give a measure of come in, say what you think, we'll take all of that into account and then make a decision. People are feeling like decisions are made, and then the next day a 40-page thing is coming out to tell us how we're going to do it. So I think that being on the board requires that transparency. The board is the mediator between the community and the school district. And the board is also the accountability. They hold the accountability standards for the school district. So I think sometimes the board is in line with the school district where it needs to be off to the side, if that makes sense. So instead of just being straight down like this with the school district and the board, and it's like this stacked, they need to be off to the side because they are the connection to the public. They are the ones that are the ultimate governing board. And so again, I'm not going to say I don't think full day kindergarten will be a good thing. I think it is going to be a good thing. I think we're going to see our scores for kindergarten to third grade increase in the reading, and we need that. So I don't say that that is not a good thing. It's that the choice was not given or discussed in the beginning, and that's what I disagree with.
Chris, I'm going to start this one with you as well. I think it's your turn to start a question. So this one feels really timely, given the teacher shortage that we're experiencing statewide and nationally. Specifically, what do you think the school board can and should and must do to support educators? And we'll go Krista, Dave, Beth, Greg.
So I think something that needs to be happening is I think teachers need to just be collaborated with. Our teachers in our district, as I've been learning more about this position and reading more, 75% of them have master's degrees and they've worked 14 plus years. So we are really lucky that we have excellent educators in our district. And as I look at what needs to be happening for them, I think their job satisfaction goes up when they feel like they have some say in what's going on. And I don't know that they always feel that way, just as I just cited with that example. As I have been out asking people, I'm a non-threatening party because I'm not a trustee yet. And so people are talking to me and they'll tell me what they think about things. As I ask questions, they'll say, oh, you really want to know, like, are you mic'd up? Am I going to get fired? The fact that someone would even say that to me tells me a lot. People don't feel like they have a voice in what's going on. There needs to be a voice for our teachers. What they're doing is so important. They are essential for our children, and what they care about is our kids. That's why they got into it in the first place. So I just think we need to give a voice. It needs to be more powerful. They need to feel like, change is coming about in our district because I said what I thought needs to happen in my classroom. And they need more respect, as I already stated in the beginning. They need authority in their classrooms. We've taken everything that was successful for our generation. You look back, what was expected in a classroom for your behavior? How are you expected to teach, to act to your teacher or your peers? And if you didn't do those things, what happened? There was consequences. I know students went to detention. There were things that were happening that just aren't happening anymore. And they're only happening for the really huge, big things. We're ignoring the other things that need to be happening. And I think that would bring a greater quality to what educators are experiencing in our school district.
Dave.
Thanks, Kevin. Teachers are high on my list. I think the magic happens in the classroom, and it always happens between a teacher and a student. And our board is really focused on supporting educators. And I think that's why you'll see all the incumbents actually were endorsed by the BEA. And so the teachers have had our back, so they do feel supported. Krista said we were really lucky to have the teachers that we have. I don't think we are. I think it's been very intentional for our board to attract and retain the very best teachers in the state. And you say there's a teacher shortage, and there is in the state. But what it hasn't happened is at the Boise School District, we're actually in pretty darn good shape as far as having certified teachers in place already. We're not having those shortages, and that's because we're attracting and retaining the best teachers. They are coming from other districts to work for the Boise School District because they do feel supported, because they do feel like we do care about them and what happens in their classrooms. Does that happen for every teacher? Absolutely not. We have over 4,500 staff. It's a big, complex organization. But we have in place a school board that supports teachers. We have a negotiation process with our teachers that goes year round almost. It will start up again in September. We sign a final contract in June. We go through this process called interest-based bargaining, and we listen to each other's needs and wants at a meeting every month. The trustees are not involved in this process, so the teachers do have a chance to speak freely. And they come up with the contract at the end of the day that is usually approved with a 96 to 99% rate, which is fairly unmatched in most school districts. But once again, it's hard work, it's constant two-way communication, and it's respect from both sides. And it's, like I said, the teachers are our most important part of our machine. Without them, we can't teach students, which is what we do. So it's a simple question for me.
Beth.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that we're very fortunate to have the quality of educators in our school district. And I agree with both Krista and Dave in that, you can't have a high quality education system without our teachers. One of the things that Dave alluded to is our partnership with the BEA, the Boise Education Association. And that is an organization that allows teachers to have their voice. And as Dave said, the whole negotiation process that we work through with the BEA that the trustees are not involved in, that's at the administration level. We're very, very fortunate in our district to be able to have that partnership and be able to hear through the BEA how our teachers are feeling, what are their needs, and what's going well and what's not going well. And so we're very unique in the Boise School District that we do have that relationship and we do have that partnership and we do have that trusted voice, so that as a trustee, we can learn from a variety of different teachers through that lens of the BEA. We are also very open to talk to teachers. We're just coming off a lot of new educator orientations. We've got a lot of lunches that have happened, and several of us have been able to attend those and really get in front of teachers and be able to hear from them what's working, what's not working. But I think at the end of the day, we are very fortunate that we are able to support our educators. As Dave mentioned, we have educators coming from across the state who want to be part of the Boise School District. And with, as Dave said, over 4,500 staff, you're never going to please everyone. But I think that the numbers of support through the BEA and negotiations, I think that speaks loudly to how we are supporting our educators.
Greg.
Thank you, Kevin. First and foremost, I think that the compensation has to be competitive. And I believe that's the case in the district currently. Everybody knows my wife's a teacher, and if you know a teacher, everybody knows what other teachers make in other districts, but also importantly in other states. We have a couple of nearby states that we need to be aware of what they're paying and giving the benefits as well to make sure that we do attract, but also importantly, as Dave and Beth said, maintain those quality educators. So I am definitely a big advocate for making sure that the teachers' compensation is in line with other districts of our size and that we're obtaining an edge there. And secondly, I like what Dave said about the magic happens in the classroom. And I totally agree with that. And I think that that's why the primary connection on that tiny or that local level there is between student and teacher, but also behind the student, obviously, is the parents. And I've been fortunate to, with most of my kids' teachers, they've been very open, very communicative. But I think to foster that magic, as Dave said, we have to make sure that the teachers are feeling heard. And Beth mentioned that they're having some interaction. I think that's great. I think it needs to continue. And I think that it should start with the local level and the school level. So the parent should have the confidence in the administration that they can go up to the principals and have the discussions there. But if this becomes a bigger issue, I think that they should feel free and have no concerns about going up even higher to the district, and ultimately, hopefully, to be brought to the board if necessary. To feel like that their concerns and their voices being heard. And so, compensating them and making sure that we're listening to them and taking into account their views and what they say is working for their class and their school and what's not. I think those are two critical things.
Beth, I'm going to start this question with you. So much of the national debate about education has centered on hot button topics like critical race theory and indoctrination. And the Boise district was subject to a public records request on this topic about a year or so ago. In your view, is there any legitimacy to these complaints, concerns about CRT and indoctrination in Boise schools? So I'll start with you, Beth, and then we'll go to Greg and Krista and Dave.
Sure. Well, Kevin, as you know, I've been involved in the conversation around CRT and some of these other hot button issues for the past couple of years. What I will say to that is that considering the majority of the people don't even know what CRT is and cannot articulate it outside of a law professor or a higher ed, I will say that it's nonsense. I think that it's just all rhetoric. No one really knows what it is. No one can really describe what that means. I will say that, based on that, I think it's nonsense, and I don't think that we need to be spending any time talking about it. And let's focus on what's actually happening in our classrooms. Let's talk about how we are best supporting our students and providing them with the opportunity to learn to be successful through career and college when they're done with school.
Greg.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. And yeah, I mean, part of the problem is, what do you define critical race theory as? Generally, specifically, whatever. And I know everybody is all over the map on it. I see it in the classical way of it's this intersection between society and race, and there's a group of people out there that are teaching that whole institutions and whole areas of our society are fundamentally racist just by definition, and nothing can change that. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that, and I wholeheartedly disagree that should ever be taught in our schools. This is one of the problems, I think, Beth, by just dismissing it out of hand. I think that's a real problem. This is happening in our schools. I'm not saying it's widespread. I'm not saying it's happening every day or every teacher, but I've heard from parents, and there are instances where lessons are being taught of that. So I don't think it's a huge problem. I don't even think it's technically allowed to be taught in our schools. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. And I think to shut this off completely and say, oh, it's not happening, and turn a blind eye to it is a mistake. Again, it's not. I don't think it's a widespread issue, but that if we continue to just say, oh, it's not happening, it's not there, then it's going to become a bigger problem. So for me, it's just, again, being open to listening to the parents, understanding, and then actually investigating. If there's some sort of a claim made that it's being taught in some form, look at it. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but at least investigate somehow, and don't just dismiss the parents outright, and see if it's actually happening, and if it is, to take the appropriate remedial measures.
Krista.
So adding on to what Greg just said, I think we have to look at this as there's no place for it in our schools. I think, Beth, that's maybe what you were saying, is there's no place for it in our schools. It's not something that needs to be taught in our education system. We have so many things that need to be taught in education that need to be taught in a stronger way. So this just does not need to be a part of our Boise School District. And I agree with Greg, so I'm kind of bridging between both of them. I agree with Greg that if there are complaints that it is being taught, I won't turn a blind eye to it. I will say, let me look at that. Let me see, because there's no place for it. So I think that both sides of it, no, there's not room for it in our education system. It's not something we need to be addressing and teaching in our education system. And if it's being taught in our education system, I will stand up and say it's not allowed here. We cannot be teaching this, because that is our Idaho state law. So I think we have to support both sides of that, recognizing there's no place for it. And if someone tells me it is going on, I will address that there's no place for it. And I will ask the district to be accountable to make sure it's not in our district at all.
Dave.
Usually it's a pretty simple answer for me. We don't teach it in our schools. If we did hear of instances, we would investigate. We had a statewide indoctrination committee that came into our district offices for 4 hours going through all our things and found absolutely nothing. And those are the people that really wanted to find something, and they could come up with nothing. So for me, it's a thing against public education in general. And, I'm happy to have conversations about it. I'm happy to, if we feel like it's an issue, we'll do it, but we haven't found those issues. We haven't found any instances where we're doing that. And we will, if it does come up, we will address it.
Greg, I'm going to start this question with you. Earlier this year, the Nampa School Board drew national attention when trustees decided to remove 22 books from the library shelves. As a prospective trustee and then also the incumbent trustees, can you envision a scenario where you would support removing books from library shelves? So we'll start with Greg. We'll hit Krista and Dave and Beth on this one.
Thanks, Kevin. To say that's a loaded question is an understatement, but I've gone through the policies, and let me step back. Boise School District has specific policies that cover these kind of instances, and I know the trustees can probably speak to this better than I can, but I've reviewed them, and I appreciate that. I support those policies. One of the policies allows parents to request that if there's a book or some materials they don't agree with, that they be able to have their kid opt out of that. And I support that. One of the concerns in reading those policies I had, though, was what I didn't see was anything that says that's not going to have a negative impact on their kids. And that's one of my big issues, is that if there are decisions made to opt out individually by parents and students, that doesn't negatively impact them in their school environment at all. So I do support the policies. And in fact, I will say the policies that are in place do allow, subject to review by committees and ultimately going up perhaps to the board for final decision, they do allow for materials and books to be removed from libraries and classrooms. So that is out there. But I will say that I've read those policies and I support them as written, subject to my caveat that I always want to make sure that there's no negative impacts on students and parents for them making these kind of decisions. So if I was elected, I would continue to support those policies and maybe, like I said, tweak them a little bit to make sure that the kids have that protection from their, that there's no adverse impact to them.
Yeah. Krista.
Kevin, I've been shocked at how many people have written to me and asked me about this. It is such a big issue in our community right now. And I've been shocked by it. So I agree. I think the policies in place at Boise School District, it's not just like a trustee and a group of trustees can just wipe out books like what has happened. It's a layered approach. And I think that's important to mention, that it's not just going to one governing body to make that decision. There's a committee in place to make decisions about whether this book is appropriate in the school or not. And I believe, and again, the incumbents will be able to speak to this, but I believe that it only comes to the trustees if it can't be resolved within that committee. And I would assume that that's a pretty rare thing, if ever, that it comes up outside of that committee, because I'm assuming that they would be able to address this at a lower level so that trustees are not using power in this governing body to say none of these books should be here and start checking off a list. I will say, I feel like it's incredibly important that we recognize whatever we're putting in front of students needs to be emotionally appropriate for them. So sometimes we think, oh, they need to be taught this, but when do they need to be taught that? When is that appropriate for them to have that education? And we often do not look at the emotional side of what they're experiencing. If there's pictures in the book that have content there that is pornographic in any form, I would say there's no room for that in our schools. Again, we're talking issues in the midbrain, and there is not room for pornographic books in the Boise school. So you ask if there would ever be something that I would say, no, there's not room for that. I'm saying it right now. There's no room for pornographic books in the Boise School District. In addition to that, again, I just think it's a layered process, and I think that's a good process. So I support the process that's in place.
Dave.
Well, we do have a process in place, and we have a committee in place that can take teachers' things. The problem that happened, like in the Nampa School District, is the trustees chose not to support that process, and they invented their own process where they banned books. So that's why I guess trustee elections are important, because trustees do have that power to do that. I am a big process policy guy. We have them in place. It serves us well. It's important that we follow those. You know, like Greg said, parents can opt out of lessons. They can opt out of books. We give them that option. And we do that without repercussions for their students. They have that choice. But we need to have process in place where maybe if we do have something, you know, that it would come up to a committee that first looks at it, and parents look at it, and students look at it, and teachers and administrators and librarians. This is what they're skilled at. This is what they're supposed to do. Let those people do their work. And then if they want to make a recommendation to the board, hey, this needs to be banned, then we would consider that as a board, and I would do my homework on it and try and understand that. But once again, it's about process for me. It's not about, oh, we're a group of trustees, we know better than the process in place. I want to go through those long processes and make sure that we make the best decisions possible.
Beth.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add more from Dave and Krista and Greg. I do think that it's wonderful that we do have a process in place. It does work. I can't think of an instance where something like this has come to the board level. That's not to say that it won't. I will say at the end of the day, it's a slippery slope. Once a board strays from the process and starts making decisions, you know, what one person thinks is appropriate, another person might not, and vice versa. And so trusting in the process, I do support the policies that we have in place. I think that they were obviously very intentional, and the committees that we have, if this were to come to a board level, we would have that discussion. But again, we have to let the process take its place, and we have not had an issue yet. And I honestly hope that we don't.
We have about 7 minutes left. All four of you covered a lot of ground. We've hit a lot of topics. I want to ask a question that sort of ties together a lot of what we've talked about here this past hour. School trustees across the state, across the nation, are facing maybe more scrutiny than they have in the past. And we've touched on some of the reasons why: the pandemic, some of the social issues that are facing education. So the question I have for you, the flip part of the question is, why do you want this volunteer job, given everything that's facing school trustees? But maybe the more thoughtful way to look at that question is, why do you want this job, and how do you see the role of a school board in the year 2022? And we'll start that one with Dave, and then Beth, and Greg, and Krista.
I love this job, and I tell people that regularly. I mean, as crazy as it might seem, I'm investing a ton of my time, my talent, and my treasure, you know, in this position. And it's because I care about my community. Born here, lived here, raised my kids here, want my kids to come back here. And I view it as maybe the best way I can spend my time investing in the future of my community. My goal is to run this board in a way that's transparent, it's accountable, with processes that are in place that may take a long time. One area I feel like we could, you know, get better at is communication, whether that's involving all stakeholders or two-way communication or telling our stories better. I think that's important as well. But I think I can still add a lot of value to this board. I'm very good at listening to all, whether it's trustees from left or right, or parents are left or right, and it's not even left and right, it's just different ideas. And we need to synthesize those and still come up with, once again, the final product is what's best for our kids, which in the end will make our community better. And I'm just invested. So thank you.
Beth.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I get asked that question all the time. Why do you want to continue doing this? I really do love it. At the end of the day, it has been challenging the last couple of years, but I love being able to volunteer my time to add some value to the school district, whether it's from a parent perspective, whether it's from an education policy or advocacy perspective. I think that we have one of the best districts in the entire state. I'm really proud of the district that we have. I'll also say that, and I've referred to complexities a lot throughout this conversation, and it is a very complex system, and it takes a lot of time to learn all of the ins and outs of just the operations of the district, but also how policies are made and how decisions are made and all of the different aspects within the school district. It takes a long time. I mean, I remember just even 3 years into it and even 6 years into it, I'm still learning. We have board meetings and workshops and committees, and I find myself saying, wait, we do what? I mean, this is somebody that has been doing this for 6 years and continuously learning the complexities of how things work, which allows me every year to make better decisions. So I want to continue with what I have learned of the school district over the past 6 years and continue in an effort to support our community. I am a firm believer that strong schools make a strong community. I'm very vested in ensuring that our students continue to have the opportunities to learn, that our teachers are supported, that our families are also supported, and at the end of the day, just supporting our community. So it is to me, it's the most important volunteer work that I have ever done. And I just look forward to continuing to learn and provide value and a unique lens to the conversation.
Greg.
Thanks, Kevin. And you said at the top that trustees are, school district trustees and board members are finding themselves under increased scrutiny these days. And I say good. I say any elected official should recognize that they're going to be subject to scrutiny. And I think that's a good thing, because they are in a position of authority and they were elected there. And especially when you're talking about the welfare of our kids, there's nothing that's more important to me than that. And so you said, why are we running? That's why I'm sitting here. And I don't question Beth or Dave's motives. I think they have the kids' interests at heart. I totally agree with that. I think so do Krista and I. And I think we all have our kids and the rest of the district's kids' best interests, as well as the teachers and the staff. But for me, quite frankly, I have disagreements with the way that the current board has been handling that. And I get back to the transparency issue, and Dave's right. Communication is key. If communication was better and there were more transparency, I wouldn't even be here. I'm investing a lot of time and a lot of my own money as well in this campaign. I'm taking it very seriously. We have a grassroots campaign. It's a lot of my friends, a lot of parents in the district that are willing to help out. I've been blessed with my career, but I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I have a business that I need to run. So yeah, even just campaigning is taking a lot of time, and I put in a lot of time in making comments and attending board meetings, as Dave and Beth know. So I'm here because I think it's worth it, because I think my kids and other kids in the district are worth it. And I think that I would bring a new opportunity and a new point of view to the board. And again, I think transparency is at the top of my list, and that would be my main function and my main effort. And should I have the privilege of being elected? Thanks.
Krista, last word to you.
I really see things are missing for our kids in our community, and that's why I'm doing this. It's not, it's been actually really challenging. And your question, Kevin, as to why, I've woken up so many mornings asking myself, why am I doing this? And it's really been difficult. I've been posed as this right-wing extremist that's going to be disruptive and going to be divisive in a polarizing world. There's been so many things that have said, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm trying to be constructive. I want to build our schools up. I want to build up our kids. I see things that are happening, and I care about our community. I was raised here in Idaho, and I feel like I gained an education here that still is with me. And that's an education of being respectful. It's a code that I live by. I like to call it the Idaho Code. And it's living by respect. It's living with courtesy. It's living with kindness and honesty and hard work. And I don't feel like our kids are getting that. And I feel like the education system is a critical way we can help get them that way of living. And they're not getting that because we've just gotten to a point in society where anything goes for kids. They can do whatever they want. we're so worried about lawsuits. We're so worried about all these other things. We're not doing what's best for kids. Kids need structure. They need responsibility. They need consistency, and they need rules. And they're not getting that in school for consistently. I won't say all kids aren't getting it. My daughter's getting it. She's getting it in my house. So she goes to school and it's translating over to school. For kids that are not getting that, it's not translating over to school. And I think our community needs it. People are coming here from all over because they're attracted to it. They're attracted to the way we live. They want to live like our community because they see that there's goodness here in Idaho, and we've got to keep it here. We have to help it translate into the next generation. I have a very unique perspective that no one else on the board will offer. As a mental health professional and experience working with teenagers, I know what works for kids. I know how to help our kids. I know how to actually get in and start solving this problem. So that's why I'm running for the board. It's not because I want to blow everything up. It's not because anything that's been claimed so far. And I really naively, I think I got in and thought, oh, the BEA, they're going to love me because I have a perspective no one else has. Oh, the school district, they're going to love me. The current trustees are going to love me because I offer something that's so needed right now. 70% of kids are dealing with mental health following COVID. I have a perspective to address that. And I feel like I'm putting it out there and I'm fighting. I had no idea how much work this campaign would be, just trying to fight against money and against name recognition in a community. But what I have is I have a voice and I have experience. And that's why I'm doing this, because I care about our kids and our community.
I want to thank all four of you for joining us today and answering questions. And I want to thank you also for responding to our written questionnaire. We covered a lot more ground in that questionnaire. So if you want more information from these four candidates, go to idahoednews.org and you can read what the candidates said in their own words. To recap again, this is race number 1 in the Boise School District. These four candidates are running for 2 6-year terms. The top 2 vote getters are elected, and that election is on September 6th. So if you watched this long, I assume you are going to vote, but if you're at all on the fence, please vote and make your voice be heard. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello and welcome. This is part of a series of candidate forums that we're co-sponsoring with candidates for Boise School Board. My name is Kevin Richert. I'm a reporter with Idaho Education News, and we're pleased to be partnering with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce for these 4 virtual forums with candidates for Boise School Board. The candidates you're going to hear from in this forum are the 3 candidates in race number 2. This is a 4-year term. Top vote getter gets elected. You'll be hearing from Andy Hawes, Neil Mercer, and Matthew Shapiro. I'm going to begin with letting the candidates do kind of an introduction. And Andy, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Neil and Matthew. Give us a little bit of an introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how your background informs your candidacy for school board.
Great, thank you, and thanks for hosting this. Again, my name is Andy Hawes. I'm a 5th-generation Boisean and grew up in Boise, and I'm a proud product of the Boise School District, Hawthorne Ace Junior High and Boise High School graduate, and had the pleasure of raising 2 kids through the Boise School District, and we got one graduated and actually one that will be a senior. Spent my entire life here, and I've always been a longtime supporter of the Boise School District. In the 1990s, I led the charge with some citizens to advocate for the renovation of Boise High School, and the Boise School Board was deciding whether or not to renovate Boise High or build a new one. So through that experience, and then throughout my life, I've been a big supporter of the Boise School District. I've volunteered. I was a head coach for Boise High School soccer. And then, of course, as my daughters went through the school system, Longfellow, then North, and then Boise, put in a lot of volunteer time. So probably the biggest, I guess, as far as my experience with the Boise School District is, in fact, serving as a Boise School District trustee, and I was appointed about 1.5 years ago. And I think probably that is, to answer your second question, what in my background qualifies me or lends itself well to this position would be the very experience in being a trustee for that 1.5 years. where I had an opportunity to serve with the board and oversee $300 million plus budget, help manage COVID, and really deal with all the things that a school board trustee would wrestle with in serving. So that's my background in a nutshell. Again, I'm Boise native. After I graduated from Boise High, I went on to University of Denver, graduated with the political science major, then went to University of Idaho College of Law, and spent a bulk of my career as an attorney, where I practice natural resources law. Great to be here. Thanks.
Neil. Neil, you're on mute.
I'm Neil Mercer. I recently retired from the Air Force out of Mountain Home Air Force Base. My father's side of the family is from the Idaho area, be it Emmett and Meridian. My grandparents got married down in Mountain Home, where I was stationed. So I've been through Idaho quite a bit. What prepares me for the role of school board trustee is serving as an officer in the Air Force. I've done multiple tasks, like $1 million worth of equipment and personnel being deployed one place to the other as a officer in charge of the mobility of our unit, to include other jobs. You get a different job each year in the Air Force as a ground job on top of the flying the jet itself. So all those things help prepare me. It also instilled the Air Force core values in me. So things like service before self and integrity in all you do is a big component of who I am. Having retired, I now have 2 children here in the Boise School District. Part of the reason why we decided to settle down here, on top of the fact that, Idaho is a pretty great place to begin with, was the schools that are available to my children here. And so we settled down here in part because of that, and just kind of seeing how the school board is, I decided to go ahead and throw my hat into the ring, as I think that there are some better ideas that we can implement in order to help the schools perform better, and ultimately our children perform better is what we're really looking for.
Matthew.
Good morning, Matthew Shapiro. I've been a Boise resident for almost 30 years. I have a student in Boise schools, and I have the unique distinction of having worked in education extensively. I started as a paraprofessional in Boise schools in the early 2000s, became a special ed assistant at 2 local junior highs, got my bachelor's in elementary education, started a inclusive and innovative charter school in Garden City in the early 2000s, where I taught the middle school group all subjects, and also served on the board of that school, that public charter school, both before and after my service as a teacher. So I became very familiar with Idaho education rules and laws. After that, I was allowed to go directly into the doctoral program in curriculum and instruction at Boise State University, where I focused on the culture of schooling and education systems, something I've been interested in for a very long time. I think between that background and my longtime focus on participatory design, which is about engaging the broader public in designing education and understanding education, my knowledge of participatory processes just as a community advocate, and my focus on civics education, which I can talk about a bit later. Those are the things that I think make me an outstanding candidate for school board at this time.
Okay, thank you all. And let's dive into some questions now, and I'll mix up the order so each of you will start, and we'll start this first question with you, Neil, and then go to Matthew, and then go to Andy. What do you think is the top priority facing the Boise School District, and how would you address it?
Well, I think one of the top priorities facing the school district right now should be focusing on getting the teachers what they need in the classroom. We have declining enrollment in the Boise School District, which is going to lead to needing to look at the funds that are spent and used a little bit more closely and make sure that they're going to where they need to be going.
Matthew?
Yeah, so in terms of immediate challenges, we have the 1,300 students that have been lost over 2 years, declining enrollment, which the district has started to try to address. There are some factors perhaps beyond its control because it's a complex systemic issue related to COVID, related to housing affordability and all those things, some of which we can affect, some of which we can't directly. Teacher staffing shortages, another factor. We need to do the most we can to make sure that professionals have the support they need in their schools, the competitive salaries, better relationships with the universities, with new teachers. I mean, ensuring we have that pipeline, if you will, of new teachers that can come into the district, and there have been a lot of retirements as well. And the third thing I'd say is student mental health has become it's been talked about a lot as an issue, whether it's new or not, we'll see. But I think there's a lot we can do in terms of school culture to make sure that kids have the fundamental things that they need: belonging, significance, a sense of self-determination and effectiveness, and equipping students, families, and staff with the tools and the curriculum needed to support that social aspect of schooling. It'd be very important. And then, of course, is the what I consider long way to go in terms of civics education. I think it's very superficial right now, and I would like to lead from the board level a comprehensive design process for a new civics program, K-12. So that's a priority.
Andy?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. There's a lot of challenges, and I think about everything's a priority when we're talking Boise School District or public schools in general, whether it's teachers, additional funding. But my top priority would be to improve stakeholder input. As a result of the COVID and the pandemic, there was a bit of a disconnect with some of the stakeholders because of the challenges of COVID. And as a role as a Boise School District trustee is to gauge or understand the community needs and wants, and then marry that with the community resources. And so it's critical to understand the community needs, and that dovetails into our strategic plan that talks about engaging the community so they have an understanding of what we do and understanding what the community's needs are. So because of the challenges of COVID, my top priority would be to improve stakeholder input. As most may know, earlier this year, I guess just a meeting ago, we approved a student advisory committee for the board, and that was a result of a 7-month process to look at improving engagements with students. And so I think that's a good precedence to look at other ways or other methods to improve stakeholder input. So my top priority would be to continue and to improve stakeholder input as if I'm allowed and have the honor of continuing my term as trustee. Thanks.
Matthew, I'm going to start this one with you and then go to Andy and Neil. I want to talk about pandemic protocols and how you would approach those issues going forward. This is less of a question about how did Boise do over the past 2 years, but how would you approach the situation if it were to arise in your time as a trustee? If science said we're in the middle of a spike, if science suggested that more protocols needed to be brought back into into place. How would you approach that situation were to come up?
Sure. Well, I think health comes first, public health, student health comes first. So getting that input from public health professionals is the starting point. Two is exploring the range of options we have for minimizing risk. So such as masking, not masking, hybrid alternatives that the district did employ, choice to the extent that it's possible, engaging the school community, parents and staff effectively to understand the facts and the risks. And then ultimately, the decision is the responsibility of the board to make that call as to what to implement. You didn't want to touch on the past decisions. I think they were well made, and we have to continue to be nimble in looking at what the surges are, what the risks are, what we can do to balance all the factors, and as well as reluctance to observing my own student. I think my own students seem to adapt well to masking, and I think that was true of a lot of her classmates. So I think the resilience is there. I think resilience is a little less there, perhaps on the parent side, but all voices have to be respected, and at least everyone has to understand the reasons why we're doing what we do.
Andy.
Yeah, thank you very much. So last night we considered and adopted the continuation of the Boise School District's health and safety plan, which was a continuation of last year's plan that was adopted in March. And so that plan contemplates how do we address the rise of COVID or any communicable or spreadable disease. And it's a great plan. It's a result of a lot of work, a lot of stakeholder input. And so I would look to the health and safety plan to be our guidance on how we move forward in addressing and dealing with COVID or any other disease. Just as a reminder, what that plan does is it looks at various factors to determine what mitigation measures would be appropriate. And those factors would include what is the rate of community transmission, what do our health professionals say, and also looks at considers the status of the healthcare system. So based on that, depending on the spread, and then the other factor is, of course, what are the absences that that the school district is facing in terms of students and staff as well. And then that health and safety plan has a whole list of mitigation measures or tools that can be considered depending on the severity of the spread of COVID or any other disease. And so we'd consider that, and out of this plan, which incorporates some interests that were identified in an endemic committee that was put together, that looks at, okay, which mitigation measures are appropriate. And some of those interests that are incorporated in the plan that was put together by this endemic committee, which was comprised of parents, students, teachers, and staff, considers, what is the least restrictive way to deal with mitigation-wise to appropriately address the effects of COVID. What's the impact on the families? But it also sets forth, we've got to be clear in what our strategies are for that. And then also we've got to be laser focused and have the ability to pivot. So long and the short of it is, I'm totally satisfied with our health and safety plan that we have in place. We've got a good system The patrons and parents, that is, parents seem to like it. We had a survey that was out there, had 600 plus responses that looked at this exact same plan, and they overwhelmingly liked the plan and they want it to continue. So that's why last night I approved of the plan, and our plan is to follow the health and safety plan, and I have total confidence in that plan, and so that's how I would recommend. That's how we're going to address it going forward. Thanks.
Neil.
Well, I'd say not talking about the past, at least now using the past as a measure, we have more information at least on what COVID is, how it affects people, and what we can expect out of it, and then the results of different measures that we use now. So we're in a position now where we can make a more informed decision about any policies that get put in place. So we at least have that going for us, and we can see what the measures that we've done or instituted have done to our children. So like sending kids home for, a year and a half, 2 years, we can see how they are now performing in school versus the people or the districts who chose not to homeschool kids or do virtual learning. So we can see those differences as well. So there's a whole lot of new metrics that we have that we can look at and lean on going forward. My default answer is usually let's see what the plan says, and then we can deviate from there, right? So we have that health plan, and then depending on the different scenarios that come up, you can adjust from there. There's also the opportunities to do both in school and virtual. So that for the high risk people who are worried about it and have reason to, everybody has reason to worry, but the people who are especially at risk can do potentially online while everybody else goes in school still, and I guess the benefits of being in that group and being able to speak directly with the teachers.
Andy, I'm going to start this question with you. So much of what so much of what you can do as a Boise trustee is dependent on what happens at the legislature and what the legislature does. So give me a sense of where you feel like the legislature is doing a good job of supporting education, and where do you think they've come up short? So I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Neil and Matthew on that one.
Yeah, great question. So as we know this year, funding, we had increased funding this year from the state legislature. We had a surplus, and so we're seeing more dollars coming in from the state. I think the state did a good job also during the COVID and providing aid and funding as we dealt with COVID and some of the effects. Then we got really good support from the state. And I think the greatest challenge, though, is fundamentally, where do we go from here? We've had some momentum on funding. The state has been a good partner in dealing with COVID. And so I think the biggest challenge is how do we build off of that? How do we move forward? And we've got good relationships with the state. We've got a legislative committee that we deal with legislators. We're an active member of the Idaho School Board Association. One of our board members, Nancy Gregory, is the president, or incoming president of the Idaho School Board Association. So we've got a good channel. We've got good relations, and I think the biggest drawback with the state is in some cases there's been some communication gaps and some challenges there. But I think that the key in that is to continue to build those relationships to overcome some of those communication gaps and challenges that really resulted in some perhaps misunderstandings on what we do and what schools do in the state. Thanks.
Neil.
Yeah, I think I agree mostly with that statement, to be honest. I think that the legislature and the state of Idaho in general is doing a pretty decent job of working with the schools, giving the schools the funding that they need to operate and be successful. There's areas where improvements can always be made. You can always find something, but overall, not disappointed.
Matthew.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that long-term funding is increased so that, momentary surpluses, we can't rely on those for long-term sustainability. So I think making education funding a higher priority in the legislature is an ongoing process. I think the legislature should stop waging ideological battles on education. And the third thing I would say is major decisions about the direction of curriculum should probably come from the bottom up and not from the legislature. So, for example, this year, the legislature decided to, sorry, I think my video just popped in and out. Regardless of the merits of Common Core, there's in education, if you study the history of education reform, you see these swings, pendulum swings. Things get introduced to a new thing, and then politically there's an attack on it from usually some special interest group. There is not support for it because education isn't really a grassroots movement, and then it gets shot down for political reasons rather than practical reasons. And educators, those are three areas where I think legislature can improve its support for education.
We'll get to ideology here in a second, but I want to stick with one decision that the legislature made that affected a decision that Boise made, the move to all-day kindergarten. I want to get a sense from Neil, then Matthew, and Andy. Do you support the move to all-day kindergarten in the Boise schools? And going forward, how would you measure whether the program is successful or not?
I do support all-day kindergarten for a few reasons. The least of which is, there's working parents, especially in today's economy with the, rising inflation. There's more and more parents who need to be at work for a little bit longer, or they need to go from a single income household to a dual income household. So it helps with that. But more importantly, is the fact that study after study has shown that early education increases the successfulness of the child once they leave the education system as a whole. So like once they graduate high school, the kids who started earlier in kindergarten have higher test scores and higher success rates after leaving high school. So I'm for kindergarten, and all-day kindergarten. I think is a good day, and it's a good way for kids to start.
Matthew.
Yes, I support all-day kindergarten for the reasons of parental support. I think it works better for working families. I think kids are at that age perfectly ready and I think it does certainly contribute to success later on. I would like to see I don't want to see kindergarten be just a prep school for first grade, in the sense of, the meaning of the word kindergarten means children's garden, and it was intended developmentally to be a time when kids could play and engage creatively with each other, with arts, with nature. I would like to see a lot of that. If we're going to have the opportunity to have kids in an educational environment early on, I think we should really think about what it should be for and how we should operate it. So I bring to the table a lot of background in different models of education, and would love to pose questions like this to the community. So I think it's an important design question.
Andy.
Thank you. I support full day kindergarten, absolutely. That was reflected in my support and vote by the board where we adopted full day kindergarten. And I think it was definitely due within the Boise School District. Some people, probably most people know that Boise School District did provide full day kindergarten, but that was only in it wasn't in all schools. And depending on your background and where you lived, you didn't necessarily have that access, or you may had, or you had it paid, or you had to pay for full day kindergarten. So to take a step back and to implement full day kindergarten for everyone free of charge was a big win for the Boise School District. And part of that decision, in my mind, in supporting it was a few things. One is the success statistically that you see of students that have the benefit of full day kindergarten. That's not in dispute. And also how kindergarten has been successful throughout the state. As understand, we were in the minority, Boise School District, in offering full day kindergarten. Majority of schools, districts in the state of Idaho offer full day kindergarten. So how do you measure that? I think, again, statistics would be a way to measure the effect of, or the impact of full day kindergarten before and then after, probably look back. But I think part of it is to have a discussion over the next few years, in particular with our first grade teachers. I think really full day kindergarten's awesome for our kindergartners, but really the impact starts right away in first grade. So I think having a comprehensive look back discussion with our first grade teachers to see what's the impact, and to really assess how ready, or more ready, I guess, these kids are in first grade as they move through their journey in elementary school and beyond.
Matthew, there's been a lot of talk about the teacher shortage, statewide and even nationally. I want to start this question with you, and then we'll go to Andy and Neil. What is the one thing you feel like the Boise School Board can do tangibly to support educators?
Well, having gone through the educational leadership program at Boise State, I'm very big believer in the importance of school culture, and both certified and non-certified staff feeling fully supported professionally and personally. I'm not saying that isn't done, but just ensuring that we are doing all we can in every school at every level in that way. And also, there's always a public and parental dimension to it, sort of the perception that there's a perception that a lack of respect perhaps for the education profession that is affecting morale, it is said. So to address that issue and so many others, I think it's really important to ramp up parents' understanding of what educators actually do, putting themselves in their shoes, making it less of a black box. I would like to see school councils created. So we already have some PTAs, but a school council would be an ongoing forum for dialogue between parents, teachers, students on any issue or concern. And it would be a real, I think, step up in terms of engagement to help increase that support and understand the way that educators feel, but also parents and the others. It would affect so many issues that are controversial as well as routine. So,
Andy.
Thank you. Boise School District has a strategic plan, and part of that plan is to not only set forth the goals, objectives, strategies on hiring the best and brightest, but also to retain our teachers, who are the best and brightest, no doubt. So the key is, how do we help our educators? And the key, which is actually set forth in the strategic plan, is to solicit input and feedback, so we understand the issues, concerns, or resources perhaps that teachers or educators need, or ideas that could make our educational system better. And in turn, also, I guess, provide the tools and resources that allows educators to perform to the best of their ability. So input, feedback, and provide tools and resources so they can go out and do what they do best. Thanks.
Neil.
So when you first said tangible, I was kind of thinking, pays, right? Because that's something that everybody can see and everybody can do. But pay is not why people do a lot of their jobs. Like same thing with the military. You can pay somebody a whole bunch, but if you're treating them poorly or you're not trust them like you should, they're going to walk out, and that's just how it is. There's a pilot shortage in the Air Force right now for that same reason. Then they keep up in the pay, but people keep walking because it's not all about pay, and that's an important thing to note. That being said, everybody should be paid fairly for the services that they provide, right? Because they provide a value for us, and it's a great value to the community that they give us. So pay should be a part of the equation, but it's maybe not as high up as people would think on the tangible side. So a lot of it, I believe, is kind of those intangibles, like teacher morale, like what are they feeling? I think the best way to go about that is to speak directly with them and find out what it is that are their concerns. What are they feeling is something that would benefit them. I think there's these days potentially a lot of second guessing of teachers, and we leave our kids in their hands for hours on end every day, and we need to have faith that they're doing what they should. I'm one of those people who just assume good intent out of people, and I believe that we should just assume good intent out of our teachers, and we should give them the benefit of the doubt that they're doing the right thing for our kids. Obviously, it goes back to the old Reagan trust but verify, right? So you need to have some kind of metric in there to make sure that things are going as they should. But if we give them the support that they need and ask for, I think a lot of stuff can manage its own at that point, and just making sure that the care and feeding of the system is healthy.
Okay. Let's talk ideology a little bit. Andy, I'm going to start this one with you and then go to Neil and Matthew. So much of the debate about education nationally and even at the state and local level has surrounded terms such as critical race theory and indoctrination. And the Boise School District was subject to a public records request on this topic about a year ago. Are there valid concerns here in your view?
No, there isn't, Kevin. We in Boise School District did not have critical race theory or any sort of indoctrination part of the curriculum. That said, if there are in fact any concerns that a parent has or a guardian has, whatever that may be, we have policies in place where a parent can ask, for example, if it's material, if there's some material that's a concern for a parent or guardian, that parent can have a conversation with the principal, and there's a process where the student would not have to have that material, and there'd be other methods, material that could be provided. There's also policies that are embedded within the Boise School District that deal with, if there's an objection on, concern over curriculum overall, materials overall, where there's a committee that can be formed and ultimately a process that would ultimately come to the board. So no concerns whatsoever with critical race theory. But if there are concerns, there are policies in place where parents or guardians can pursue if there are concerns on the material that we're providing in our curriculum.
Yeah.
Currently, I'd say no concerns about how things are right now. I do believe that the policies that are in place should be adequate to deal with things like that, such as, in Napa, I think we all know about the situation there with them, essentially banning, 22 books, something like that. There's a policy in place in the Boise school districts that allows for parents to raise concerns and be able to bring those forward and have them handled that way. I don't think that we should just outright say that parents don't have concerns. I think there are a lot of concerns over these because people see what's happening around the country and they kind of wonder if that's happening in their school district. And I think that's a good thing. I think parents being involved, bringing parents in is a great thing because it gets them involved with the process. We get their input and are able to make decisions, based off of what the end user, the parent, wants for their child, and for us to provide the best education that we can. I think there is definitely worry. It's that whole slippery slope argument of, hey, well, West Ada just bought a curriculum for $125,000 for CRT. So, saying it's not in Idaho is no longer an argument that someone can make. But again, we do have procedures in place that would allow that to be reviewed, and I'd go with that, and then from there we can change to the situation or make decisions as the situation dictates.
Okay, Matthew.
Well, Kevin, you asked if the concerns are valid. So I think it's wisest to adopt the policy that all concerns are valid, first off, then figure out how to address those through openness and transparency and invitation. That concept of building bridges so that the broader community and parents can understand what is being taught, what is not being taught. And then in the area of how we address things like racism, we can't ignore that. There are issues in our society that our students see and need to learn about and need to be equipped to talk about. And I think that's the key, is figuring out how to talk about things without influencing kids in one direction or the other. I have a book from 1940 called, it's like a case book of civics in our high schools. And that in that book, it says students should be taught how to think, not what to think. Well, that was 1940. And today, that is still considered to be the way to go. And it's just a matter of how do you do that and how do you demonstrate that that is what's happening. And it ties back to civics education and the need for building our capacity, both within the schools and around the schools, to talk about issues and in an empowering manner. And so that's the tough part of it.
Neil, you teed up the next question I had, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to get back to it. You mentioned Nampa and their decision to ban 22 books from library shelves. I want to start with you, and then we'll go to Matthew and Andy. Can you envision a scenario as a trustee where you would make a similar decision about removing books from shelves?
Well, a similar decision to Napa, no, because the way they went about it was kind of, not in line with their own policies. From what I understand, policies of the Boise School District are that if a parent has a concern, they bring it up with the school, and then a committee is formed with, involving teacher, parents, and the principal. And then based on that decision, the parent can then appeal that decision up to the board. So the way they did the process, no. And generally speaking, as just my own philosophy, banning books is not a good idea. That being said, there is the line of what's appropriate, right? So I'm not gonna want to see a Playboy in the library at the elementary school, right? So if that were brought in, then I think we have a very good discussion about banning that material, right? I don't think people are going to bring that in, so I'm not so worried about that discussion. So there's that line of what's appropriate for that age. Generally speaking, I'm very against banning books, but I can see a scenario where something that is inappropriate for children or for that specific grade level, even so, maybe not, maybe in the elementary school, but not in the high school kind of thing. And that's a broader discussion that we'd have with community. But I'd say they have to go through the process of being brought to the attention via the process I mentioned earlier. But yes, generally as a general philosophy, banning books is bad, but that doesn't mean that there's no instance where a book might not be banned.
Okay. Matthew.
So I start from the standpoint that our school librarians are they are professionals and they understand their responsibilities in terms of what material is out there. I also think it's naive to think that that our kids aren't hearing about things outside of their school libraries through their friends, through social media. And so I think the idea that they're being exposed to things that are going to damage them is a little bit naive. Are there materials out there that really should not be? Possibly. So those should be identified, and that should begin with the school librarians, and then through the administration. And where there are controversies, I think, again, this concept of school councils, where students and teachers and parents can talk about what is of concern, what should be there, what should not be there, and then perhaps before it gets raised to a district level and the question of removing things wholesale might be a good step. That's a lot more participatory and, again, educational for the entire community to go through that type of process. So I'm a big advocate of participatory ways of addressing things.
Andy, last word to you.
Hey, thank you very much. Again, thanks for hosting. So no concern that we will go down the path what NAMPA did, because we have a different system. The system has policies in place that provide for if individuals have concerns on an individual book, parent or guardian, there's a process to have that book removed for the purpose of that class for that individual. There's also a process in place where if parents or guardians have concerns over a book that's being or material for district wide, a process to follow. And all of that process involves input by principals, teachers, parents, and ultimately a process that leads back to the board. So I have no concerns because we have a separate process that's in place. And so where NAMPA's decision was a unilateral decision by the board without having the benefit of such policy. So I do not foresee Boise going down that same path at all. Thank you.
I want to thank all three of you for joining us here today for this virtual forum. Andy Haas, Neil Mercer, Matthew Shapiro. And I want to thank all three of you as well for responding to our written questionnaires. We covered a lot of ground there, topics we didn't get to in this forum. So if you want more information from these three candidates, please go to idahoednews.org. You can read these candidates' responses in their own words. Again, this is the race. This is race number 2 in the Boise School District. These three candidates are vying for 1 4-year term on the board. The election is September 6th. If you watched all the way through, I suspect you're fixing to vote anyway, but we would encourage you to vote and make your voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is part of a series of virtual candidate forums that we're having with the candidates for Boise School Board. My name is Kevin Richert. I'm a reporter with Idaho Education News, and we're pleased to be partnering with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce on the forum. You're going to be hearing from the 4 candidates in race number 3. This is a race for 1 2-year term on the Boise School Board. We have 4 candidates: Nate Dean, Don King, Todd Kurowski, and Elizabeth Langley. And I'm going to begin by having all 4 of you take a minute to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and what in your background would inform your process as a member of the school board. And let's go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Nate, go to Don, Todd, and Elizabeth.
All right, thank you, Kevin. My name's Nate Dean, and in many ways, Boise Schools has been my home. I graduated from Timberline High. I student taught in the Boise School District and spent 6 years of my career teaching in the BSD, both at Fairmont Junior High and the Boise Online School. In general, I actually expected to spend most of my career in the Boise School District. However, after I discovered the elevated levels of lead in Fairmont Junior High's water supply and advocated for student health and safety on that issue, I was retaliated against by the BSD administration. That led to a multi-year whistleblower retaliation investigation that ended up finding decidedly in my favor, but it left things in a state where I didn't feel like I could stay in the district and stay in the classroom without facing further retaliation down the line. That said, one thing I promised all of my students every year that I taught was that I would always be an advocate for them, even when they were no longer in my class. And seeing the way that things went in the district, seeing some of the failures of leadership to protect students and do what was right, I felt called to be able to step up and serve them in a different way now that I'm not at the district. I bring not only expertise as an educator, I'm trained as an administrator as well. I served as a building rep and delegate for the Boise Education Association. And I spent the last year working at the State Board of Education as the Educator Effectiveness Program Manager, working on policy and teacher retention. And so I bring a lot of insight both on the policy side and in terms of what it's like to be actually in the field. And I feel like I can leverage that to support our staff and students in a way that they are currently not being supported right now.
Don.
Well, my name is Don King, and I am a retired educator as well. I taught 31 years in the Boise School District. I also adjunct for Boise State University and NNU. My parents were both educators, and my father graduated from the Boise School District. I graduated from Bora. My children have graduated from the Boise School District, and I currently have 11 grandchildren in different stages. 3 of them go to Amity, 4 of them go to Bora. 4 go to West and 3 go to Bora at this time. I have my master's degree in literacy. I have traveled around the state teaching comprehensive literacy to teachers, and I have a really strong passion for reading. I feel that the reading specialist was one of the most important jobs in the school district to assist students learning how to read. In my experience, I worked with many kindergartners, getting them ready for readiness, and I was appalled to see how many were not ready to enter the kindergarten system. And I'm so thankful that now there's going to be a full-time kindergarten system for them to go ahead and to progress. And that's about it.
Todd.
Well, good morning. My name is Todd Kurowski. Some of you already know I'm retired military, but I have a little bit more background than that. Grew up in Idaho, K through 12 here in Idaho. Both my parents were teachers in Idaho. My academic background is basically psychology and organizational psychology. I have a master's of organizational development from Central Washington University. And I really focus on basically organizational cultures. I look at basically the informal culture behind an organization and what they say they are versus what they actually are. And that's my area of deep interest. And what I bring that to our schools is kind of as an outsider, even though I have a kid in the system, I'm not steeped in the school, so I don't have kind of necessarily the blinders of seeing the same thing every single day. So I think I could be a little more objective, at least in many areas. So that's about really all I have to say, other than why I'm here. I'm here to run.
Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Elizabeth Langley, and I'm currently the sitting trustee in this position for the school board. I've been in this position for just under 2 years. I was appointed when another trustee stepped away because of the difficulties of COVID. The reason I was approached by the district to become a trustee or put my name in the hat was because I had been working with the school district for so long. I spent 8 years on the foundation board. I was also on multiple district-wide committees. I'm a parent and also a business owner and active finance person in the community. And so there were some holes that I fit well for at that time on the board. And we have a very diverse board, which is one of the strengths of our board as it stands now. It gives me a little bit of insight in how the strategic plan goes forward. And we also implemented full day kindergarten, multiple different aspects of the last 2 years that we've been able to implement that have fit well with my background.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Let's jump into some questions, and I will mix up the order in which we go on these, but I'm going to start this one with you, Dawn, and then we'll go to Todd, Elizabeth, and Nate. I want you all to talk about what you consider to be the top priority facing the Boise School District and how you would address it.
I think the top priority of the school district has to be teacher retention. I have a daughter that's currently teaching over in Valley View School District, and she was contacted by the Boise School District yesterday looking for a math teacher. And I think that in the elementary grades, we're pretty good, but I think when we get to the more specialized areas, we have a harder time with teacher retention. I think one of the things that we need to do is, first of all, develop more respect for teachers and what they're going through in the classrooms, and give them more support with what problems they think that they are facing, as well as increasing pay. When the average pay in the state of Idaho for someone with a master's is over $95,000, and in the Boise School District, it's about $65,000. That's a huge discrepancy that needs to be addressed and taken care of through the legislature. I think that some of that can be addressed internally within the school district. Like I said, I think the teachers need to feel like they're more supported in the classroom, that they're not often in their own classroom, in their own world, and left alone to do their own thing. But I think that some of it needs to be addressed through the state legislature and the State Board of Education. Thank you.
Todd.
Well, I totally agree about the staffing challenges. It's definitely on my high list of things. The thing that's most important to me is the poor relationship between the primary customers, which in my opinion is the parents, and the school district. To me, there's a direct correlation between dropping numbers of attendance and so forth, and its relationship with the parents, who are, again, they're the primary stakeholders in their kids. And I don't know how to heal that, but at least talking about it out loud and addressing it, I think would serve very, very well for all of us.
Elizabeth?
My main focus of what I think is most important going forward right now, I have a short term and a long term. In the long term, the Boise School District is in attrition, and it's a very complex problem where we have increased cost of living, decreased ability for young families to access the city of Boise's housing. So what we are seeing is actually a great decrease in the lower grades and the ability for those families to start in the Boise School District, and an increase in enrollment in the upper grades. So when those families become financially fit, they come back to Boise. I'm not going to tap dance around it. One of my main initiatives as well, as Todd said so well, is transparency to parents. I don't think we do a good job of showing our processes. They're very complex processes that are very open to the community, but if they don't know that, they cannot engage. So I've been absolutely dedicated in the last 2 years to continuing to open that line of communication and education to parents on how do you get involved. Please be involved. This is the most important thing that we can have. In my opinion, education is the future for not just your child and their future, but our economic strength for the city of Boise and our state in the future. So I think it's a huge initiative to concentrate on that long-term goal of working with the city, the state, to address the cost of living in Boise. And we can't do that alone. A lot of that is advocacy and partnership. And then in the short term, we came out of COVID and we missed a lot of curriculum in that time. And about a year ago, in the midst of COVID, we started changing the strategic plan and hired some expertise using some of the ESSER funds that are provided by the government to build back that curriculum into the programming for the children so that the time that they were out of the classroom or that they had a reduced exposure to success in the classroom due to COVID, we can provide those learning opportunities going forward now and build that into the curriculum in the grade above that would have been covered in the previous grades. So continuing to address that in the short term, I feel is very vital to the success of the school district and getting those kids caught up. I'm so proud that Boise School District has such a strong educational system and the performance has been so high quality. We want to retain that. We want these kids to come out in the top in the country. Boise Schools is rated in the top 6% of school districts across the country. We are not struggling in like many Idaho schools to fund a very diverse set of programs. So it's really important for us to be able to continue that process and get past this short-term COVID impact.
Nate, your top priority.
So I think there are a few issues that are all in the running. I think transparency, student mental health, quality of the facilities, those are all kind of in the top tier, but I have to agree with some of what's been said previously in terms of teacher retention or educator retention, including our school psychologists, school counselors in that mix as well. Retention is going to be a massive issue statewide. In my time at the board office, one of the things that I was tasked with was analyzing the state educator pipeline, looking at educators coming in and leaving the profession. And there are some really, really troubling early signs in terms of the retention issue getting worse going forward. And while Boise School District has been resistant to that due to the higher salaries and better benefits that they've been able to offer than many of the districts around the area, all indications are that it's not going to continue to be the case going forward. And it's not just going to be hard to fill positions. So I think that as a district, since our number one priority is serving students and giving them the best education possible, you can't do that without learner-ready educators who are feeling supported, who are committed to staying in the classroom, working with kids long-term. Some of that is controlled by the legislature, unfortunately, in terms of having sufficient funding to be able to make salaries competitive. Some of it is based on the community tenor in terms of how educators are viewed and whether teachers feel supported in their role. But research shows that the best thing that the district could do is really truly invest in professional development that is driven by the educators, that recognizes them as professional experts in their field and lets them customize things. A lot of the stuff, the Boise School District offers great professional development training, but a lot of it is top down. A lot of it is directed by the district administration and dictated to the staff rather than driven by the staff and what their individual needs are at their site with their students. And in every other professional field, we look to the professionals to guide their own professional development and growth. And I think the district would be well served in making a move towards having a more educator driven professional development plan. Also, mentoring. Mentoring is a huge gap area. Early career teachers need quality mentors. While the BSD has a better mentor program than most of the state, that's unfortunately not saying much in terms of how robust it is. I can tell you, I served as a new teacher mentor in the Boise School District just a few years ago. I know what the program is like, and it really doesn't offer the kind of support to teachers that we need to be able to keep our young teachers in the field, give them the resources they need to feel supported so that they'll stay. And also with the increased reliance on emergency provisionals and alternative authorizations and non-traditional routes that don't have student teaching experience, that mentorship piece is even more important. Currently, the mentor program in the Boise School District doesn't meet the State Board of Education standards for mentoring. And I know that because that was a program that I was in charge of looking at while I was at the State Board of Ed. And so that's an area that we need to close, not only from a compliance aspect, but from a making sure that we're serving our students and addressing what is probably going to be the biggest need in our district over the next 10 years.
You all have teed up a lot of the questions that I'm planning to get to here in the next 45 minutes, but let's start with one. The Boise School District is launching all-day kindergarten this fall, to the point where there are not going to be very many students in half-day kindergarten. It's going to be almost universal all-day kindergarten, and a couple of you already have alluded to it. I want to ask all four of you, do you support the move to all-day kindergarten? And going forward, how would you assess whether the program is successful? What metrics would you use to measure success? Todd, I'm going to start with you on this one, then we'll go to Elizabeth and Nate and Dawn.
Good question. How can I say this? Well, if you're going to go from half day to full day, does research or any data support that that's actually healthy for the kids? Do they, can they handle only so much information or programming? I hate to say word programming, but education, and then do they need more time to do little kid things? I mean, play and everything else outside the home is kind of important. In many ways, I don't feel qualified to answer this question right now because I don't know the facts. I don't know really what's going on, and not a good place to be in many ways. I consent.
Elizabeth.
Well, I absolutely support all-day education, all-day kindergarten for education going forward, because we have 43% of children that are free and reduced lunch children. They don't have access to early interventions in their child care situations or in their homes. They may not come ready to learn. And we can partner with those families at an earlier stage to prepare them, not with having to learn what's 2 + 2 in kindergarten. That's unrealistic. We really have built a curriculum of helping them learn how to learn so that they're prepared for school when they enter. I think that going forward, there is a huge amount of research that shows early intervention, including all-day kindergarten, even in the Boise schools, has been incredibly beneficial in when we look at our all-day kindergarten classes compared to our half-day kindergarten class, what they're looking like when they enter first grade. And there's just so much opportunity there for growth in those children if they do get that higher level of exposure. And then nationally, there's lots and lots of research as well. So we are definitely on board. We are not the first school district in Idaho to do this. We are one of many school districts to adopt this approach. And we will continue to assess. When we went through COVID, we actually brought in a curriculum expert. Her name is Jody Mills, and she has built some new assessment tools for us going forward that we're implementing, and we've implemented over a series of educator conferences this summer as we go forward. And that included a new mentorship program that will meet the state guidelines. And so we'll see that going forward, but also the state has requirements for how we report. And so we have a very transparent system of reporting how we are doing by educating. We have very clear numbers that you can compare to all of the students across the state and assess exactly how the students are learning from one semester to the next, to the next, to the next. We're only required to report those numbers twice a year at the beginning and the end so that the state has some ability to see how the year went. However, we do it regularly throughout the year because we want to also come back to ourselves and see, is this a system that's working? So I'm absolutely advocating for all day kindergarten. I think it's essential that we provide as much as we can to all of the children in Boise schools, not just the wealthy children that have access to a primary education in their home or specialized education before they go to school. So I'm thrilled that we are able to do it, that we're leading the charge in the Treasure Valley and implementing something that many other school districts across the state have found successful.
Nate.
So when the question of all-day kindergarten went before the legislature, myself and my colleague at the State Board office, Allison Henkin, actually did a literature review on research on whether all-day kindergarten was effective or not. And we found that as a general trend, the peer-reviewed research out there shows that all-day kindergarten is at the very least not harmful to students compared to half-day kindergarten, and if anything is probably beneficial, especially to those students who have less resources at home and maybe are more disadvantaged. There is some question in the literature about whether any gains in terms of literacy and performance stick with the students past third grade. There's some research that shows that it may tail off. But one thing that some of the early research shows is that some of those non-academic skills, things that make a kid learner ready in terms of being able to go into a classroom, have those soft skills to be able to self-manage, self-regulate, participate, that all-day kindergarten can be really beneficial on those things. And so I think there's not really an argument to be made based on research against all-day kindergarten. And I believe that especially our students that need the most support, there's some really good indications that that move is going to be serving them well going forward. The one thing that I will say, though, is that a major trend in the research is that it's not just all-day kindergarten, it's how you run all-day kindergarten. The mention was made about kids needing to do kid things, play, have interactivity. And play-based learning is a major aspect of how to do quality research-based kindergarten. This is not sitting, a bunch of kindergartners in rows and pointing at a whiteboard for, 8 hours during the day. And I think that as long as the district is making sure that they're supplying adequate professional development to ensure that kindergarten educators know how to teach in a way that is developmentally appropriate for those students and fits with the research, then I think that all-day kindergarten is the right move.
Don.
Boy, going last is tough because all the points I was going to make are already taken. But I agree that all-day kindergarten is so imperative for all the reasons that Nate just mentioned about readiness. One thing, I have had the opportunity to work in many kindergarten classrooms, and the time was so limited. The time they got the kids all ready to do everything, and then they had their specials, and then they had recess, that, when it came to the academics, it averaged out to be right around 75 minutes most. And that's between reading, writing, math, everything else, a little bit of science thrown in. And I think with going all day has made it more effective for them to do other things. I too, Nate, feel that play is so important. When I first started in the Boise School District, I was a kindergarten teacher and everything was play-based. And then they made the jump about 3 or 4 years into be an academic-based program. And we were all like, oh no, how could they do that to these kids? But it turned out to be a really good thing, and the kids were ready, and kids are resilient, and they know what they need to do. And we just need to provide them the tools to do that. As Trustee Langley also pointed out, there is measurements that take place at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year called iReady. It kind of tests, what they have learned during the year, tests their readiness and if they're ready or not. And I think it's also really important that teachers also gather the data on where they were at the beginning of the year compared to where they are at the end of the year, using, notes, assessments, anything else that they can, just to make sure that they know what they're doing.
Elizabeth, I'm going to start this question with you, and I want to ask all four of you about pandemic protocols. And I know there's going to be a certain amount of talking about how this has all been handled the past 2 years. And I expect that. But what I really want to see us drill down to on this question is how the four of you would proceed on this issue going forward. If the science suggests that we're in a situation where you have to, or you may want to, or you may need to revisit some of your pandemic procedures and policies, how would you approach that as a trustee? So Elizabeth, I'll start with you, then we'll go to Nate and Don and Todd.
Sure. Well, I think that we learned a lot over the course of the last 2 years. And I think that we made mistakes, that what we did right, was depending on experts, and not just national experts and guidance nationally, but local medical experts. And so interacting with our community, and then also we surveyed our community extensively, parents, teachers, actually students, secondary students, and and our community members. So a lot of different voices at the table as we dealt with COVID. Now, going forward, COVID has been labeled an endemic. And so in moving forward, we have created what amounts to an endemic response to COVID, which is what does an illness that affects our community look like, and how do we keep our students safe? One of the positives that came out of COVID is just getting that like stricter level of understanding of how we keep our families safe in school from illness in general, all illness, including whooping cough, which has grown as people become less vaccinated in our community, and other exposure to illnesses, flus, colds, things that can put our elderly family members or at-risk family members in a situation of harm. All of those things now are being addressed by our policy going forward, which is our health and safety plan. And that health and safety plan really depends on a baseline called the district illness procedure. And that procedure is an outlined procedure where a family assesses how sick someone is. And this is America. We are very proud of how hard we work. That's the backbone of what America is about. Idaho is a great example of that, and so is the city of Boise and Boise schools. So we have to re-educate our population to really take assessment of their personal health and stay home when you're not well. In the short term, with the variants that are out there now, that is an effective approach from the CDC, expertise as well in the community. We had reports from both St. Al's and St. Luke's that in the high level of COVID currently, we still don't see increased hospitalizations. So we're seeing that this has become truly an endemic, that COVID is out there. It's spreading, it's continuing to be what it is, but it is not doing what it was doing previously, which was great numbers of hospitalizations, putting our communities at risk. So while these variants we're continuing to see are manageable, we have a manageable system that asks our families to address illness in a responsible way. And we're actively and aggressively educating around what does our district illness procedure look like? How do you assess, are you too sick to go to work? Are you too sick to have your kids come to school? And that decision is a little lower bar than it used to be. So we need to really be strict with that personally at the family level. But it is a family decision. Now, going forward, the one thing that I can say that is the same, inconsistent in all aspects of life, is change. And we don't know what's coming around the bend. What we do know is that we've learned a heck of a lot, and we have a lot more people at the table now to make assessments if we needed to change swiftly. We also have, devices, internet, et cetera, that have been deployed, systems for all of that. We have great amounts of systems for both the online Boise school system and then the classroom to go online in the individual classroom setting for short amounts of time. So those are two very different systems that we've put into place that we can utilize if for some reason the next variant is a bigger threat, or if we find ourselves in a situation with a whole new thing that's not COVID. We have learned so much, and we've come a long way. So I think we're really prepared to make swift changes. And we don't know what those will be, but we're ready.
Nate.
Thank you. So I want to go ahead and address the district's illness plan that they put forward and kind of reviewed at the board meeting last night. And I believe it's fairly similar to what was adopted last spring as well. And I personally think that it's a mistake to have a document like that in the situation that we're in that doesn't even mention COVID by name at any point. I understand the idea of wanting to move things towards a more endemic response that applies to all things. But the reality is, looking at what medical professionals are saying, we're not quite there yet. We are heading that direction. We're really still in a place where we need to be nimble and look at this as its own issue, separate from general health with other respiratory illnesses like the flu and whatnot that we of course want to control as well. I think that we as trustees, none of us are experts on this. I'm trained as a scientist and I try to keep up on everything, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a virologist and an immunologist. And so I would defer on those things to what the recommendations from medical groups, specifically groups that are not obviously influenced by politics to the same degree as like Central District Health are, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the leaders of our local health systems, and defer to what those recommendations are. Honestly, I know that it's a contentious issue in the community, but if those groups recommended and said, hey, based on the current trends we're seeing, we need to have masks again because this variant surge is happening, I would support a move back to masks. If they say other mitigation strategies will take care of it and we don't need to go there, then I think that that's what would guide things as well. I think the priority, though, is making sure that we can keep kids in school and as safe as possible while they're in school. And whatever mitigation factors we need to look at to make that happen, that should be what we're considering. Going forward, my priority as a trustee would be truly addressing the problematic HVAC and air handling in our schools. I know that that's something that has been slowly being worked on in the district, but as Dr. David Pate mentioned in Idaho Matters on the Doctors Roundtable just a couple weeks ago, that's been the most glaringly overlooked area in pretty much districts across the board. We have older schools that the upgrade to the HVAC that was done was essentially slapping a filter in an old wall air conditioning unit that doesn't move enough air to make a difference. That's not making students safer in any real way. And I think that we need to realistically look at the fact that having proper air handling that can move things through not only is going to help prevent COVID transmission, but will also prevent absences due to any illnesses that we might be seeing respiratory wise. And if those measures are in place and if they had been put in place earlier, I think we could have had a much better conversation about whether masking was necessary to have as a requirement. Mask optional policies are a lot more reasonable to discuss when you know that your facilities have the proper air handling and that was not prioritized properly in the district.
Don.
I agree with what everybody has said. I think that it was really important to involve the students, the parents, and the community in the decisions that were being made. And I also think it was important to listen to the medical science that was taking place. I agree with Nate that there were a lot of more things that we could have done and probably still need to look at some of our older schools as far as fixing the air and the filtration systems and things like that. But I think ultimately the pandemic kind of came down to what the parents decided would be best for their students or their children. And I think that as administrators and things, they needed to really look at what was the best interest of the teachers, the best interest of the students. Keeping kids in class would probably be one of my top priorities after watching the effect it had on the lack of social development within my grandchildren during that time and how much they missed their friends and the interactions that they missed. They also really missed the interactions they had with their teachers. And online is not always the same as that hug or that smile that the teacher gives directly to them. I feel that the level of understanding that we've had about the pandemic at this time has also increased. But I agree with Trustee Langley that we don't know what's going to happen next, but the plan, at least we have a plan in place that we can build upon. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to deviate a little bit from what everyone else is saying. Hey, this is a loaded worm here, loaded can of worms, in my opinion. What I really believe is I think this matter really belongs to the parents. I'm grateful we have great science out there, science that is constantly evolving and constantly getting new and updates to what's really going on. The bottom line is we didn't know what we didn't know, and I think we made some absolutely poor choices. Maybe they're the best choices we made at that time, like mask efficacy. I am not a fan of the masks. I'm more of a fan of washing your hands and keeping physical distance and so forth. But I'm also not a biologist or virologist in any of those things. I like what you said about the HVAC. That actually was something I appreciate. Though I do bring up a question about letting kids develop their own immunity. 5 years ago, this thing didn't exist, and we had flus and colds and every little bug, and kids played in the dirt and they licked their fingers and all sorts of things. And that actually, there's some science to support that's good for our immune systems. Maybe I don't have it perfectly, and that's okay. But I'm just curious about, what are the unintended consequences of our actions here? There's lots of growing evidence to support that there's cognitive and social problems with kids who wear masks too much, maybe even biological problems with wearing masks, like carcinogens and other junk that collects in those nasty pieces. So I can't support mandating these kind of measures, but I do support giving the community and the parents all the information they need in order to make the best choice for their family. And that's really all I got to say about that.
Okay. You all have alluded to teacher retention in one manner or another. So let's drill down a little bit further on that. And Nate, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Don and Todd and Elizabeth. What's the one thing the Boise School Board can do? What's the one thing you could do as a trustee that you think would most effectively address teacher retention and staff retention?
As I mentioned earlier, the most important thing that is purely within the control of the Board of Trustees is our mentoring and professional development, and structuring that in a way that supports our educators, give them what they need, and recognizes them as the trained professionals in the field who know how to target those resources to best serve their individual students, rather than taking a top-down model. The model of having everything come down from the DSC is this black box that staff and administrators oftentimes don't even know why it's coming down to them. It's just, what the word is from on high, which I can tell you, having worked in the district for 6 years, is the majority of the time that something comes down, that's the way it's received. Oftentimes, even our building principals will tell us, I don't know, that's just what I was told we're doing, so that's where we're moving now. That's not something that makes a teacher feel like a valued, independent educational professional. And I know staff who have left the district over that. That is a direct result of district leadership. And that is something that the Board of Trustees, it starts with them and can move downward from there. I think that needs to be the priority going forward, because other issues like salary, those are largely beyond the scope of the board to be able to act on their own.
Don.
I agree with that, and wholeheartedly. Being a teacher, all of a sudden the box shows up and there you go, and you get something else thrown on your plate. I think the first thing that the board needs to do is to be a lot more transparent about their expectations. When a new program is started, I think they need to present that to the teachers and tell the teachers and staff, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing that, instead of just being thrown into an uncomfortable situation with what something else is expected. Teacher retention is really hard if you don't have support from your peers or from the administration or even the school district. Many new teachers struggle with the basic things. When I was a brand new teacher in the Boise School District, my peer teacher, she came over to me and she said, show me your emergency bag. And I said, my emergency bag? And she goes, yeah, where you have emergency food, emergency clothes, emergency sewing kit. I didn't know about any of that. I didn't even know what she meant. And as a first grade teacher, within the first 2 or 3 days of school, I'd been thrown up on and had to access that bag. But this dear sweet teacher always was right there with me. We taught together for 28 years. I cried when she retired because she was always my biggest supporter. And I feel so bad for teachers that don't have that emotional support continually. I also think that teachers feel like they're not appreciated for what the expertise that they bring, or the information or understanding or college levels that they have. And I think it's harder in a junior high or high school setting where there's only one mere teacher that teaches the same thing that you do, instead of like through all the schools, like in elementary school. I also feel that teachers need to feel the support from the community. And I think that's one thing that the school district has started with the Golden Apple and the Red Apple, recognizing these teachers, and the meeting at the beginning of the school year where they recognize everybody's awards. And I know there's a publication called Around the District where they print all of these things. But now that I don't teach, I never see any of those. And I don't think the community sees any of those. And I think they need to realize what great teachers we have in Boise and all the accomplishments that they have made. And I think that if teachers were more highly respected, then they would be more they would like to make that their profession. I don't think people leave the profession as much for money as more that they are the lack of respect that they have for what they do as teachers. Thank you.
Todd.
Wow, this is a complicated one. Both my folks were teachers in Idaho, and it was tough with two incomes to make a living. And I went hungry as a little kid sometimes. And it's had a profound impact on me about when I think about pay. I've sat down with teachers in our union, people who are teachers or are former teachers, and this is a complex mess. I mean, in some ways I kind of go, I know that they deserve a lot more pay. I mean, the things we value in our culture say that, you know, rock stars and athletes get a lot of money, and we don't give the credit to the teachers, especially the great teachers who serve with passion. And I go, I wish we could solve this problem, but how do you convince basically the tax base to support that? Because I think there's some misunderstandings there. It would be one of my guesses. I'm not an expert, but it's a guess. But the financial part is a significant one, considering our housing markets and everything like that, and the starting wages for teachers. It's kind of, it just doesn't make sense to me how anyone could even survive as a starting teacher in this town. Now the flip side is experienced teachers. Seems like there's, in some environments, there's some pretty toxic environments for some of these teachers. They maybe have too much ancillary work they have to do that takes them away from doing what they love to do, which is to teach. You know, I've met at least a couple that talked about burnout, just so much pressure put on them besides the teaching role to be there for these kids that I don't know how they can even manage. They basically wear themselves to the bone before they basically go, I can't do this anymore. I love teaching kids, but this isn't working. So again, there's no easy solution here, but maybe how our community looks at, or the impression of what our teachers really mean to our community may need to be addressed a little bit. So that's all I really need to say.
Elizabeth.
I thank you guys all for your insights. I thought that they were very compelling. But I know at the school district that we are addressing continuous growth in our educators. Our teachers currently, the average time that they have been in the district is 14 years. 72% of them have master's degrees, and we provide support and financial incentive for them to continue on that process. So within the district, we want to continue to build that pathway for educators reaching for excellence. Additionally, with the new mentorship program, we have support in school for the teachers to have a mentor that is a curriculum-based mentor, as well as now all of their passing periods with either their same grade or their same subject are going to be at the same time, so that those teachers can come together in a way that they were not able to do in the past. And we have some other initiatives going on with intercession for educators. We had a lot like what Don said. We got some feedback that we really want to, when we roll out new educational processes, we get that feedback from the educator, because we aren't educators, but we do want to use the best in class systems that are available to our education system. So we have brought in those, but over the last summer, we've had 3 learning summits we've paid for teachers to come in over the school year, learn this new curriculum, give us feedback, see if it's something that they are feeling comfortable with, and maneuver it forward as we're moving forward. And that's been very successful. We'll see how that goes in the short term. One of the other things that we're asked to do as trustees is to advocate for educators at the state level. I sit on the legislative and government committee. We interact with our state government and our national government through ISBA to try to advocate for educators. We also we're the only district that I know of that has a full year negotiation process with the teachers union. We don't start right before their contract is up. We negotiate from day 1 of the school year to the day that the contract is signed, and then the next day we start negotiating for the following year, because it's so vital for us as a district to have those standards set by the teachers and educators. So that's part of the process that I think is very important, that we continue to go forward. And that's something that started about 7-8 years ago, that they started that process called interest-based bargaining, and it's a different tool than it's harder. It's a lot more work. People have to come to the table and compromise, and it's a lot of communication, but it is a much more successful tool to advocate for educators. So those are important things. I think we are leading in those spaces, and our retention is the best in the Treasure Valley by far. We continue to retain teachers, and I'm very proud of that. However, this feedback is great to hear, and I think that's some of the stuff that we had heard from some of the teachers, and that's why we did those learning summits to really get feedback over this summer as we move forward to implement new curriculum next year. But again, state level, we need to continue to advocate, because what Todd said is right. People are not advocating for education right now. I don't know why people are upset at teachers or feel like teachers are taking advantage of the community, etc. But I know how hard these educators worked through COVID and putting children first. And it is our job to continue to advocate for this to be a career that is impacting the future of everything in our world, so that we continue to have their back and provide the state feedback so that they continue to have pay increases and job security.
Okay, so we've got about 14 minutes left here, and there are a couple topics I definitely want to get to. And Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you as an incumbent on this one, and then we'll go to Nate and Don and Todd. So much of the education debate right now nationally, state level, even at the local level, has centered on topics like critical race theory, indoctrination. The Boise School District was subject of a records request on this topic about a year ago. Is there any validity to these concerns in your view?
I think that I understand that there is validity to parents wanting to protect their children and teach them what is important and valuable to their family, and their family values being what their child is exposed to. I think that's valuable. Do I think that Boise Public Schools is teaching critical race theory? I absolutely do not think that. We have a comprehensive policy in place of overview of all materials that go out to students. And we also have a policy in place for any parent to be able to request that their student is not exposed to any of the material. Additionally, if they see a book that they think that the entire district should not be exposed to, there's a process that they can actually, a parent or guardian or a person even that just resides in the district, if they wish to have a book or material reconsidered, they actually can put in a form, and it goes through a deep process where a multi-stakeholder committee reviews that piece of material, and then whether or not it's approved or pulled, goes forward. So I think we are striving to make sure that parent choice leads what students have access to, but that we are also raising thoughtful humans, educating them to be thoughtful and be able to make discerning decisions as adults. Now, I will say if there's also disciplinary processes in place. So if there was a teacher or a single person making decisions outside of the district policy, then they would go through a comprehensive disciplinary process. And that's something that we also have a rigorous approach to.
Okay. Nate.
So I hesitate to address the issue of critical race theory, however you want to term it directly, just because I think it really depends on what definition of that term you're using, whether an answer goes a certain way or not on it. But as far as like the general concerns regarding indoctrination of students, materials that are pushing a political agenda, the things that were raised by the indoctrination task force, honestly, it's politically motivated. I, both as a teacher in the field and working at the State Board of Education, where that topic was discussed really heavily while the indoctrination task force was meeting, I have seen absolutely no evidence that that is a widespread concern or that there's any real there. I think that it's become something that has been a political dog whistle to be able to motivate people to come to the polls. And I know that this answer may not make that popular with everybody, but honestly, our teachers are there to serve their students. They're there to help educate them and turn them into independent thinkers, whether that means they think the same way as the teachers or not. And teachers themselves are not a monolith in terms of their belief structure either. I think that narrative has been extremely damaging to our educators, and there are signs that narrative is actually one of the things driving the lack of teacher attention and what is likely to be a big exodus from the profession. And so I think giving it any ground is a really dangerous territory to stand on. That said, I will say that I think that the lack of transparency by the Boise School District and its leadership has fed into that narrative. It's really easy for misinformation to grow when you can't find the truth. I know staff who have tried to find out exactly how much money is being spent on X or Y program, and short of submitting a public records request, even though that should be easily accessible information, they can't find it. I know plenty of parents who, when decisions have been made and the board states that they've had a stakeholder work group, the question comes up of like, well, how did they select that? I never heard anything about this selection process. I've seen surveys sent out where the information is cherry picked. The response rates are not actually reported, and only the questions that that ended up with answers that supported the decision that the district administration was already planning on going with are shared out at public meetings, where the questions that maybe were a little bit more mixed or would have undermined that direction are left hidden or not even mentioned that they were in the survey to begin with. And so I think that lack of transparency, the process being problematic, has fed that narrative, which is really hurting our education system as a whole and leading to teachers leaving the field.
Okay. Don.
Langley on this as well. I don't think that this is really something that the teachers have taught, or that is something that is prevalent in our schools at all. And I think there's a process in place that parents that have any questions, they have the right to see their curriculum. They have a right to, question the teachers. They have rights to make decisions for their children. And I think that this is an issue that is politically driven, and it is not something that is taking place in the Boise School District. Thank you.
Todd?
I think this is a trust issue myself, because with a vague operational definition of what is CRT, everyone has between 5,000 people, there's 5,000 different definitions. So there's misunderstandings galore, parents, teachers, administrators, politicians, everyone. And I mean, I've done my own study on it, and I have my own impressions and opinions about this matter. But when it comes to our schools, frankly, I don't know if it's there or not. But from my definition, I see what some of my kids bring home. I go, well, that's kind of weird, but that's not necessarily a problem. So again, if the parents, we all had an agreement of what this actually means, and the teachers were all on the same page, there would be less misunderstanding on the matter. So people would they could look at it and go, this is or isn't, but that's not really the case. When I talk about the trust issue, again, I think there's a deep-seated distrust from parents. I think the primary stakeholders here in our community schools with the school, we've talked about transparency problems. There's more than transparency problems. There's a toxic environment there too. I hate to use that cliche term, but I'm concerned about it because I've talked to a number of parents, and it rattles some people something fierce, whether it's happening in our schools or not. There was a breakdown in communication. And I think we need to kind of circle our wagons and have a good conversation and kind of work through our crap, so to speak, so that the parents and the schools are all on the same page and moving forward, hopefully. That's really all I got to say.
Okay. Well, let's hone in a little bit more on this. And Don, I'm going to start this question with you, and then we'll go to Todd, Elizabeth, and Nate. We saw in the Nampa School District the decision to ban 22 books from the libraries earlier this year. And I'm trying to get a sense from all four of you. Do you envision a scenario where you as a trustee or a prospective trustee would remove books from libraries? Don, we'll start with you.
No, I do not believe in banning books whatsoever. I think that this is parental control. And if a parent doesn't want a student to read a book, they should have the right to say, sorry, my child's not reading that book. Because there's so much great literature out there. I would never be the one that would say, sorry, this is not a book that's acceptable, even though it has a purpose for this particular group of people. However, as a teacher, I feel that they need to value what the parents have to say about books. I think there are many books that cover the same kind of topic that can be used rather than assigning one specific book. But I really feel banning books is a bad precedence, and I don't feel that that is something I would ever support.
Todd.
Totally agree, though there are some caveats to that. It's a slippery slope when you start banning books. I mean, and I really do think, and the school's done a pretty good job with my kids bringing home permission slips to say, we're going to talk about this book or this movie that may be even R-rated. I have that choice as a parent, and I really appreciate that when that's presented to me. Now, there's another problem. As the school libraries, my elementary school daughter, when she was in elementary school, she had a lot of reading books that were like kind of very disturbing to me that when I actually learned about them. And I go, is there some loss of, maybe it's not in classwork, but maybe they're being presented information that may be inappropriate to them in our libraries. And it's one I don't have the answers to, and I go, I really want to know more about this, but to me, it's a critical conversation I really want to have and find out what the rest of the story is. But banning books, not a good place to go. Parents need to be first here.
Elizabeth.
I absolutely do not think that we should be banning books. Part of the value of the Boise School District is that it serves a great number of different types of families. We have over 90 languages spoken in the Boise School District. We have family representation of people in foster care, homeless children, children with a traditional family unit, and children with untraditional family units. And all of those children need representation available to them. So I think it's absolutely essential that a family dictates what their child has access to, absolutely, which is why we have policies to send home those permission slips to get that parent involved. And in families that we also, families that don't want these children to see diverse types of families in our community, they are going to school with those kids. And those kids are represented in their classrooms. And these kids, their family is going to have to, each family is asked to prepare their child for the world in however they feel is right for them. And I don't think that we should trespass in that space at all. However, we are a public institution providing education for every child, no matter what their background. And a child doesn't get to pick their background. They don't get to pick who their parents are. They don't get to pick what happened to them before the age of 5. So we are asked to be there for them and provide education for them. Books should not be banned. I can't imagine us going back into a position of time where we are teaching our kids that they do not have the right to make decisions. That's not America. That's not the US that I believe in, or Idaho, or the city of Boise. So I believe that we will never ban books. As long as I'm sitting there, I will work my hardest.
Nate, last word to you.
So the short and sweet answer is that no, I do not support book bans under any circumstance. I think that free access to ideas and information is one of the most important things that you can have in a constitutional republic or any kind of democratic society. And not only that, but removing access for somebody else's children for something that you disagree with is a violation of those parents and that family's rights. As far as the question of school libraries, in a lot of ways, I think that it's a pretty concerning thing whether NAMPA's book ban is really even constitutional. The Supreme Court's already ruled in Tinker v. Des Moines that students don't lose their constitutional rights when they walk through the schoolhouse doors. Kids have their own constitutional rights as individuals in our society. And one of those rights that was later affirmed by the Supreme Court was the fact that under the First Amendment, it's not just sharing and speaking information that's protected, it's the ability to access and receive that information. Now, we as teachers, as educators, we don't have the right as government entities, as representatives of the government, to push an agenda or a political thought process or any of those topics. but we also don't have the right to restrict it. Board of trustees are government entities, and there should be no restriction on what a citizen of this country voluntarily tries to seek out as far as information. And libraries have been held by the Supreme Court to be a place of voluntary inquiry, and it would be an overstep by a government body to restrict that constitutional right.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here in an hour, and I appreciate all four of you taking the time to join us. Don King, Nate Dean, Todd Kurowski, Elizabeth Langley. These are the four candidates in race number 3 in the Boise School Board elections. The four candidates are vying for 1 2-year term. I want to thank you all for taking the time to do this, but also for taking the time to respond to our online questionnaire. If you want to find out more from these candidates, covered a lot of ground in that questionnaire, topics that we didn't get to in this forum. Go to idahoednews.org and you can read their responses in their own words. Again, the election is September 6th. If you've watched all the way through, I suspect you're already fixing to vote. But if you're on the fence, please go out on September 6th and make your voice heard. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome. This is part of a series of virtual forums that we're holding with candidates for Boise School Board. I'm Kevin Richert. I'm a reporter with Idaho Education News, and we're pleased to be partnering with the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce on these forums. You're going to be hearing now from the 2 candidates in race number 4. This is a race for 1 2-year seat on the Boise School Board. The candidates are Shiva Rajmanzari and Steve Schmidt. And I'm going to have each of you take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your background and how that background would inform your process as a trustee. Shiva, why don't you get started?
Me, Kevin. Like you said, my name's Shiva Rajmandari. I use he, him pronouns. Boise schools really made me who I am. You know, I attended Highlands Elementary, North Junior High, Treasure Valley Math and Science Center, and currently I'm going to be a senior at Boise High School. And I'm the first student running for the Boise School District Board of Trustees, and hopefully soon to be the first student trustee on the board. And I'm running because I believe that students deserve a voice in our education. I believe that, student voice, we have a lot to bring to the table. And I think that student input has been left out of a lot of board decisions to the detriment of our school district. And so, I'm a runner, I'm a teammate, I love Boise schools, and I'm excited to be in this campaign.
Steve.
My name is Steve Schmidt, as you mentioned, and I'm a father and a husband, and I'm an engineer by degree. I think one of the things specifically about my background that makes me well suited to this is that in my engineering training, I've learned the value of really being able to look at situations and problems that need to be solved or issues that need to be addressed. And I've learned the value of having multiple perspectives in helping to make those decisions. And so I bring that to the school board. I'm definitely invested in Boise. My wife and I have lived here. She's lived here a few years longer than me, but I've been here for almost 20 years. And our boys attend the schools in the district. And we want to see this district succeed because ultimately public education is critical for our entire community, not just for the students that are going through the school district now. And so one of the things that I believe is critical in our school board is that we have rational, well-informed decisions that are made by the board. And so my background as an engineer, that different perspective, and my vested interest all drive me to help contribute on the board and to our community in this way. And I'm currently a trustee, but am running to be reelected and look forward to continuing serving on the board.
Okay. But thank you both. Let's dive into some questions now. And Steve, I'm going to start with you on this one. What do you consider to be the top priority facing the Boise School District, and how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think that really there are multiple areas that our district is working on currently. But if I had to pinpoint one, I would say that student achievement is ultimately what our objective is. Our goal at the district is um, to prepare every student for citizenship, career, and college. And in order to do that, they need a high quality education. And I think the how we measure that high quality education, there are different metrics that could be used for that. But ultimately, um, we want to see that all students are learning and progressing through through their education here and ended up with graduation, and not just graduating with checking the box, but actually being able to be prepared and move forward. And so I think there's multiple ways that that's being addressed, but one that I'm particularly interested in, and then I will be following up with the administration on as we go forward, is they are renewing their focus on really student-centered learning and how the connection between an individual in the school and the student can make the difference in that student's life. So whether that's a teacher, a principal, or one of the other staff members at the schools, those one-on-one connections are critical to so many aspects, whether it's success in the class and even helping to identify kids that are starting to struggle, whether that's emotionally or mentally or in other ways. So having that connection helps the school start to recognize that and can help use the resources that we have in the district to meet the needs of each of those students, and ultimately ended up with a student that's successful and able to progress through their education and graduate.
Shiva.
Yeah, and I totally agree that student achievement is very important. But my role on the board, I think, is bringing this student perspective that has really been left out. And for that, I think that the biggest priority for our school district should be mental health. Right now, across the country, our schools are facing a mental health crisis. You can say it's because of the pandemic, but really, it's this is a long time coming. And in our classrooms, we don't have the resources we need to address that. I go to Boise High, and our student to counselor ratio is 150% of the national recommended student to counselor ratio. And because of that, students, aren't getting what they need as far as mental health resources. So on the board, I want to hire more mental health professionals, more school counselors, and make mental health more of a centerpiece in our school community. And I think that's kind of a long-term goal. That's going to take time. Another issue that is facing our school district in the short term, I think, is teacher retainment and hiring. And I think that, a lot of that comes from the state level, but we need to make sure that our teachers feel welcome in school, as well as our students feel included and feel like, they belong in our public schools. And that's what I hope to do on the board.
Okay. Well, let's stay there, and I'm going to start with you on this question, Shiva. You talked about teacher retention. That's something we've been talking about in these other forums as well. What do you think is the most important thing that the Boise School Board can do tangibly to support teachers?
Yeah, there's a great thread going around like Facebook and Instagram where it's like, we don't have a teacher shortage. What we have is a shortage of respect for our teachers and a shortage of funding for our teachers. There are plenty of qualified teachers, and our school district has some of the best teachers in the state, possibly in the country. So a lot of that comes from the state level, right? We need to be funding our schools adequately. I'm a big proponent of the Quality Education Act. I collected signatures with Reclaim Idaho. I knocked on doors, and I'm excited to see, corporations and the wealthiest of Idahoans pay their fair share so that our teachers, so we can retain high quality teachers and have classroom resources for our students. Beyond that, I think that it's important that our district leadership stand up for our teachers when they're under attack. Idaho is the center of this big campaign to undermine public education as a whole. And I think that it's super important that, as board members, as members of the administration, we ensure that teachers know that we have their backs, because our community does have their backs. And we need to make sure that teachers aren't intimidated to being in schools, I saw this, terrifying statistic where it's like almost half of teachers are considering early retirement right now. And that's because, that demonstrates kind of a culture issue. We need to make sure that teachers feel supported, feel like they have the freedom to teach, and feel like they have the resources to do so.
Steve. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I agree, Shiva, that teacher value is critical. And one way to show that is through pay and benefits packages. But another important aspect is feeling valued and supported in your work environment. And so whether those attacks or threats, if you will, on our teachers are coming from the society in general, or even in some cases we've seen it recently with parents, very vocal parents, with disagreements over how things are being handled. We need to make sure that as a district we are able to hear both sides of that. We need to be able to hear the parents and work together to come to a resolution for what's going to be ultimately what's in the best interest of the students and the teachers. And I think when we talk about supporting teachers or educators, I think the state has made a lot of progress in using the career ladder as a funding mechanism to help motivate that. But I agree that we're still short on really valuing the teachers and the importance that they play in the classroom, because they are the ones who are impacting our students the most during the school day. And so we need to make sure that we're continuing to support them and in all of those ways, whether it's financial or through benefits and then supporting them in their roles as they're facing the challenges that they face as educators.
Kevin, could I respond to that really quick?
Yeah, just quickly.
Yeah, I think that what terrifies me about what we've seen over the last couple of years is that it's really a select group of parents, a small vocal minority that are, intimidating our teachers and kind of shaping the way that we make educational policy. And I think we saw that with the book bans in Nampa, and I think we see that with, some of the organizations that have actually endorsed you, Steve. And I think it's really important to stand up to bullies. My teachers fight for me every day in the classroom and outside of the classroom as well. And I think that teachers deserve that same, group that will advocate for them, whether it's the union, but also trustees, when it comes to fighting extremism in our state.
Those are topics we're going to get to here in the next few minutes, but I want to start with you, Steve, on this one. Let's talk a little bit about pandemic protocols. And I don't want to talk as much about what's been done in the past 2 years. I think that's part of the answer, because it gives us a sense of how you've approached it so far, how the district has approached it so far. But I want to get a sense of how you approach it in the future. If the science suggests that we're in the middle of another surge, and the science suggests that maybe it's time to revisit some of the pandemic protocols that we've had over the past couple of years, whether it's COVID or something else, how would you approach that?
Yeah, I can speak for myself personally, and then also talk a little bit about how I think that our administration needs to continue supporting it. And actually, at our board meeting last night, we just renewed the health and safety plan, which really focuses on our response to those kind of infectious diseases. From a personal standpoint, I look at multiple factors regarding our community's ability to respond to this pandemic. And Kevin, I know you mentioned you didn't want to talk a lot of the past response, but I think it's key.
I just wanted the answer to be more, looking to.
Yeah, I think it's key in helping understand where I think we should go forward.
Exactly, yeah.
And what we've seen in the past is that during certain phases of the COVID pandemic, we saw hospitals that were their census were very high with patients, and at different variants of the COVID, as our community faced different variants of the COVID virus, we saw different severity levels of illness, even to the point that the current level is still significant. But it has such a broad effect on different people. One of the other things that's important to me as I look at how we should respond is our ability to have teachers in the classroom. So if we've got teachers who are out and we're not able to fill those with qualified substitutes, then that definitely plays a role in how we can address this going forward. And I think so. Those are a few of the factors that I personally look at when we're trying to decide how should we respond to this. Ultimately, our goal needs to be on providing quality in-classroom education, I believe, for our students, because that's what we see statistically shows the best performance and has the biggest impact on student achievement and student growth and learning. So I think that we need to continue, like we talked about in our health and safety plan. We need to continue to educate and reinforce good hygiene habits, whether that's physical hand washing habits, but also respiratory habits. How are we reinforcing those and training those at all levels between our staff and our students? And then we as a community need to recognize that this is more than just an individual rights issue, that this is how can we support our community as a whole? And so one of the aspects of our illness policy that we've had for some time now is when you personally, or when I personally experience symptoms beyond the norm, how do I respond to that? I think in the past, and even as a part of maybe our American culture, it's been, I'm going to go tough it out, right? It's just a cold. I can tough it out. I can go and continue on. But I need to recognize that has an impact on the other people around me and our classroom. And so I think that it's important that each of us we play a role in supporting our community in this, and making decisions that are in the best interest for ourselves and also for those around us.
Shiva, you're on the ground as a student. You're also a prospective trustee candidate. How would you approach pandemic protocols in the future, depending on what the science?
Yeah, and I largely agree with Steve that you need to look at the past to kind of look at the future. And I really do support the way that the board has handled the COVID-19 pandemic and other health and safety related issues. Following CDC guidelines, following Central District Health guidelines to keep families and students safe and keep students in school is really important. And so I agree with Steve. When it came to having teachers, I remember when half of my teachers were out, and a lot of we didn't even have subs. We'd have to go to the cafeteria. That was not a good pandemic approach. And so if we have to wear masks, for example, to keep students or to keep teachers safe and in the classrooms, I think that's really important that we do so. But more than that, I think that what the pandemic created was, a lot of compounding issues. This mental health crisis, this inclusivity, issues with, who's wearing a mask and when. And I think it's important to make sure that students feel accepted as their true selves, no matter, whether or not they're wearing a mask in the classroom. Everyone should be free to kind of express themselves in the way that they want. And I think that's super important. That's something that I've seen in my classes is almost this hierarchy come out with, who's wearing their mask and how are they wearing that. And I think that's something that we have to combat, as well as, the mental health effects of, being on lockdown for 3 months and, being isolated from human contact. I think that's super important. So I support, following CDC, Central District Health guidelines, and checking in with hospitals and seeing those hospitalization rates. And I think in this stage of the pandemic, it's really important that we just have options for students. You can wear a mask if you want to, and we're going to create a culture that is accepting of you regardless of whether you're wearing a mask, where people aren't asking, hey, why are you wearing a mask? And you have to tell them, my mom is going through chemo. That's not something that should need to be shared. You should just be welcome to wear a mask if you'd like to. Having those online options that increase flexibility, night classes, reduced student to teacher ratios so that we have smaller class sizes and can help prevent the spread of communicable diseases. I think that's super important. And I think going forward, I think the health plan and the steps that the district has taken leave us in a really good place for next year and, you know, the following decades to respond to communicable diseases in the community.
Let's shift gears, but I want to stay with you, Shiva, to start on this question. All-day kindergarten. The Boise School Board adopted all-day kindergarten to the point where almost all kids are going to be in all-day kinder this fall. Very few are going to be in part-time. How do you assess all-day kindergarten, and how would you look at it going forward? How would you measure whether this is working or not?
Full-day kindergarten is the key to kindergarten literacy rates and giving students, you know, a head start on achieving an education, you know, a high-quality education. And so I applaud the board for setting up that full-day kindergarten system. I remember, you know, when I was in kindergarten, I remember how stressed my mom was with this lottery system and whether or not, you know, we're going to get in. And that shouldn't be the case. You know, all students should have equitable access to kindergarten, regardless of how much money they make, regardless of what school they're attending. And I'm super supportive of that. One thing that is going to greatly benefit students across the state when it comes to full-day kindergarten is the Quality Education Act. And I'm, you know, very excited about the prospects of this funding that can then be used by districts across the state, including the Boise School District, to maintain that and make sure that's sustainable. Because, you know, looking at the district's plan for funding full-day kindergarten, there's some question marks coming, you know, 2023, 2025. How are we going to maintain that funding and ensure that students have access to that program? And I think that's super valuable. As far as, you know, can my student go to half-day kindergarten? I support that parent choice on that. You know, when your students are young, I think that's up to you, and I support the way that the district has handled that, leaving a few half-day kindergarten options for parents to enroll in if they so choose.
Steve.
Yeah, I think when we talk about measuring the success of all-day kindergarten, we've had a little bit of a sample of that because we did have some schools that were doing all-day kindergarten as well as half-day, and we were able to look at the test scores and also get feedback from the teachers who taught those kindergartners in first grade. And so I think as an engineer, I like data. Data, I think, is helpful to be able to measure things, but it's difficult to use data alone and test scores alone as an evaluation mechanism. So I would say that one of the things that I've talked about with the administration as a board member is, yes, let's look at the data, the test scores, and those are important. We need to see those progressing in the right direction. But how are we also making a true assessment of other things that we can't measure on a specific test? And I think the significance of that comes in that relationship with the teacher. The teachers have the interaction with the students, and they're the ones that can see and really have a good sense for how students are progressing in that. So I think it's a combination of looking at our IRI scores and other assessments and feedback from the teachers as to the students' progression.
And to clarify quickly, you supported going forward with the plan.
I did, yes, absolutely.
Okay, let me start this question with you, Steve, as well. A lot of the education debate, nationally, statewide, even at the local level, has been centered on topics like critical race theory and indoctrination. And the Boise School District was subject to a public records request on this topic about a year ago. Do you see any validity to these concerns?
I guess, first of all, I just want to make it clear that indoctrination is not something that we are doing in the Boise School District. Again, our focus is on a high quality education. As a part of our policy, we do say that we will discuss and teach kids at an appropriate level for their age on controversial topics so that they can learn the value of evaluating facts and making decisions about those things. I guess another thing that I want to say at the beginning is that we strive to have high quality, highly educated, capable educators in our classrooms. And we expect those teachers, those educators, to be presenting information in a way that is honest and fair so that it's a presentation of information and an education, not a bias or an indoctrination. So I think there's absolutely, as a parent, there is absolutely validity in being aware or asking the questions. Is there something going on in our classrooms? As a trustee and working with the administration, we are not indoctrinating people in tenets of critical race theory or things like that. I think critical race theory is interesting because I think it's difficult to even come up with one specific definition of what critical race theory is, but yeah, I think that, and I definitely support parents being involved in what the curriculum is, being aware of it. We should be aware of it. And the Boise School District has a policy that if a parent has concerns about what's being taught, that they always have the option to request that their student not participate in that. And we have mechanisms for that. But I think it's also important to realize that a large percentage of the students that we serve maybe don't have the support that I give to my kids, or maybe Shiva, the support that you had as a student. And so we as trustees are expected to be looking out for the best interest of all students, and definitely making sure that we're providing a fair education that presents facts and information and not in a biased or indoctrinating way is important.
Shiva.
I agree with that, Steve. And I think, some of this conversation about critical race theory and indoctrination really wasn't about what was happening in our schools, but about, these multi-million-dollar nationally funded campaigns to undermine public education and educators as a whole. I remember, some of my teachers were subject to some of those really aggressive public records requests, threats from, some of the people at the highest levels of state government. And what felt so isolating was that our district leadership wasn't there with me and my fellow students standing up for our teachers during that time when they were under attack. I remember one day walking into English, and we had an assignment, and half of the assignment was redacted, like with black Sharpie. It read like a CIA document, and I wonder what we are missing in our education because of those attacks, because of those unfounded attacks to intimidate our teachers and make people shy away from teaching the curriculum and teaching the facts. And so I think it's really important that we have strong leadership that supports our teachers in the legislature, in the community, and communicates that indoctrination is not what happens in the Boise School District, and that we have some of the best teachers in the state, and they know how to teach. And honestly, for me personally, those attacks were undignifying and disempowering to students. Saying that we as students are, subject to indoctrination, that we can be easily convinced as to, falsehoods is a dramatic underestimation of the intelligence of Boise School District students and the teaching of our educators.
Let's hone this down a little bit further. And Shiva, you alluded to it earlier. NAMPA's decision earlier this year regarding the 22 books that were banned from the libraries. I'm trying to get a sense from both of you. Do you envision a situation or a scenario where, as a trustee, you could see making a similar decision about removing books from a library?
I stand firmly opposed to book bans of any type in the Boise School District. I think that just like, these unfounded claims of indoctrination, a small minority of parents attacking our students with these extremist remarks is really undignifying to our students and our teachers. And I think that, America was really founded on this principle of open access to information. Why should we hide things from our students if we have nothing to hide? And so I stand firmly opposed to book bans. I think that, free access to information is the cornerstone of a democratic civil society. And on the school board, I will refuse to back down to parents. And we already do have policies in place that parents can request information, as to what is being taught in our schools, and they can request alternative content. But a small group of parents shouldn't be deciding what all of the students are learning. And one thing with regards to the NAMPA book bans, which really scares me personally, as a senior student taking AP Literature, which is a college board class that students across the country are taking, is 3 of those books they banned in NAMPA are actually part of that college board curriculum. So those book bans are now disadvantaging those students compared to their peers nationally when it comes to that particular course, that English class. And I think that the primary role of the Boise School District is to ensure that our students are adequately prepared to compete in the workforce with students across the country. And banning books is not the right way to do that.
Steve, last word to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I agree that with what Shiva said, that we have mechanisms in place in our district for people to evaluate the curriculum, and if a parent has concern about what's being taught, there's a way to find an alternate curriculum for that specific topic. When it comes to specific book bans, we also have a process by which parents can go through and cite a specific book or material that they feel is inappropriate. And I think the plan and the policy that we have in place today is an appropriate mechanism for that. So as a trustee, I don't expect that I will be in a situation where I will be bringing books to say we are going to ban these. But I do think that it's important that as a part of continuous improvement, that we always be reviewing. Is this age appropriate? Is this material the right material to have at this time in these schools? And so I think our policy allows that right now. And specifically because part of the review of that takes place at the school first, at the school level. So working with the principal, the other administrators that are there, also involving community or parent members in a team to review this particular material. And then that team makes a decision. If that decision if somebody wants to appeal that decision, then it can come before the board and the board can make a decision on that. And so I think that that's an appropriate mechanism for review to make sure that we have appropriate materials in the schools for the district. But I wouldn't, I don't, your question was, do I see myself in a situation where I would be bringing these? I don't see myself bringing books to ban, but I would welcome a review of the material to make sure that we are continuing to have age appropriate material in the schools and opening that up to that team review of the educators and the parents to help guide in that decision.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time. Shiva Rajbandari and Steve Schmidt, thank you both for taking the time to answer these questions. And thank you both also for taking the time to respond to our online questionnaire, our written questionnaire. You can find these candidates' responses at idahoednews.org. We cover a lot of topics in that questionnaire that we didn't get to in this forum, so check that out as well. These are the 2 candidates running in race 4 for Boise School Board. They are vying for 1 2-year seat on the board. The election is September 6th. If you've been watching, you're probably already inclined to vote, but if you are on the fence, by all means, get out there and make your voice heard. Thank you to the candidates, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks, Steve.
Yep, likewise. Thanks, Shiva. Thank you, Kevin.